steel and spikes, a skulking monstrosity that looked more like a beast than a chair. It served as a testament to Targaryen dominion over Westeros, each blade that made the throne taken by Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives from their fallen and defeated foes. Forged by the dragon flame of Aegon's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, it took nearly 60 days to hammer and carve the swords into the iron throne that stood before them. Steps of steel swords etched into it to make the incline up to the seat itself. With the iron throne resting atop a platform, it towered over anything or person in the Great Hall. A king should never sit easy, those were the words of Aegon the Conqueror on his decision in making the Iron Throne. She couldn't help but find them fitting as Rollo looked up at her husband, seeing him squirm in the seat knowing the throne had pricked and poked him, drawing blood with its unflinching touch multiple times in his reign. Father Daeron greeted the king cordially. Upon arriving to the Great Hall, she noticed her eldest Rhaegar was already there, standing quietly off to the side with Sir Arthur Dayne at his side. He had greeted her with a nod and a small smile. Standing at the base of the Iron Throne were the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald Hightower on one side and Sir Jonnet Horderry on the other. Rollo had chosen a spot off to the side of the Iron Throne as it loomed above her, choosing a position that would allow her to see the interactions between her husband and their children clearly. The hall was empty, and she found herself grateful for that. Not having to be watched and judged as she listened or reacted to whatever reason her husband had decided to summon her sons. It was a small mercy, but one she savored all the same. "What is the meaning of this, husband?" she wanted to ask of her brother, trepidation stewed in her stomach, a chilly finger of unease trailing down her back at trying to figure out what her husband was planning. A difficult task as it forced her to sort through his delusions and madness. Over the course of the past year, his reign was marred by cruelty and fear. Whatever it was, she knew her husband well enough to know this wouldn't be good. Masking her worry as she looked towards her silent sons, neither speaking or addressing the other as they stood below their father beneath the Iron Throne. She knew it was no accident this summon's location was here, a chance for Aerys to remind them all of his position as their king and them his loyal subjects. Aerys' silvery hair fell past his shoulders in a tangled, matted mess. The king having refused any bath or groom since he escaped Duskendale. His fingernails had grown long and dirty, an unkempt beard covered his face with the tip of his beard nearly reaching his chest. Pale sunken eyes looked out from his unwashed face, looking down at his son before him. "Forgive my delay," Father Daeron apologized, still kneeling. "I rode as quickly as I could." She could see her husband enjoyed holding this power over their son. "You may rise." Daeron quietly obeyed, standing straight, his hands behind his back, his eyes staying on the Iron Throne after only a brief flicker in his brother's direction. "I have a gift for my sons." Aerys snapped his fingers. Duskendale should have been your grave, she thought darkly. Discovering nothing good had come from rescuing her husband from his prison within the walls of the Crownland port. Rhaegar was ready to rule, he was fit and just and could guide Westeros to a brighter and prosperous future. Instead Aerys was saved and now he plagued and worried the capital and the 7 kingdoms of his growing paranoia and obsession with delusion and flame. "The gods mock my prayers," she thought bitterly. She had prayed for deliverance from her husband's clutches when he was taken prisoner. A selfish admission, but one she made freely. She sought peace and freedom, and knew she'd never feel such relief if her husband's shadow remained cast over her. She had prayed before to the gods when she was freshly betrothed to her brother, hoping for a way out of her marriage, but one never came. The gods had been silent to her pleas. So Rollo did what was expected of her, she did her duty to her parents and married her brother for the good of Westeros and of House Targaryen. Just like before, the gods didn't answer her and after months of confinement Aerys returned to her. Another chance of separation snatched from her, and she believed herself punished by said quiet gods at the monster her husband became, and the treatment that followed by his hand. Her finger gently brushing across a bruise that he left upon her arm, she had been sore and weak from his ravenous groping. The only solace she had was after he finished was that he left. There in the darkness, bruised and in tears, she understood she was receiving an answer to her prayers. This punishment for her sinful thoughts and hopes of a life away from her husband. Dark Sister Daeron gasped in astonishment. Rollo looked to see a servant had walked out from the small council chambers, carrying a plush and velvet pillow, black and red stitching, with no doubt the Targaryen dragon emblazoned on it. Atop the pillar rested the famous Valyrian steel sword of her ancestors, Dark Sister. That's right, my son Aerys sounded pleased that he had correctly guessed it. Upon hearing the sword's identity, Roriga looked to the famous Valyrian steel sword of their ancestors with great interest. One sword, Aerys announced, but two sons. He smiled through his silvery beard, showing his yellowing teeth. That is why I have decided only the strongest and most skilled of my sons will have the honor of being given Dark Sister. No, Aerys, R'hllor wanted to scream at her husband. The cold creep of understanding crawling up her spine as she saw through her husband's schemes and what it meant for her beloved sons. Aerys stood up. A week from now, you my children will fight and prove your worth to me in a duel of single combat, with the victor being granted the right of this sword for it to remain with them and their heirs. They want it. Fear gripped her heart with icy claws. Neither of her boys protesting their father's decision. Her eyes darting to their faces, first to her eldest, Roriga, whose expression was contemplative, and then to Daeron, whose look was determined. It was Dark Sister they wanted. Neither looked to have any qualms with fighting each other to get the famous weapon, and in the process to earn some small amount of favor from their father. What have you done? Her eyes moved to her husband. Her stomach turned at seeing the look that passed across his face. The smile that curved from beneath his mangy beard, or the way his eyes seemed to dance in the torchlight. Instead of their sons coming together to challenge their father, he brought them into conflict with each other, strengthening his position while weakening theirs. A show of power. He was going to tear their family apart. He was pitting their children against each other for his own gain, and she hated him for it. But not as much as she hated herself, unable to defy him or shield her sons from his poisonous machinations. In that moment, all she could do was watch, and it broke her heart. Notes. A couple of things I want to address quickly that come up in this chapter. That's right, Alyssa is in the Kingsguard. What's the point of AUS, if you can't have some fun? In this story it was Harlan Grandison who was killed instead of Gwaine Gaunt at Duskendale, since in this story, Gaunt serves as Daeron's sworn shield. It's implied or hinted that Varys comes into Aerys' service after Lord Stefan's death, but for this story, I liked the idea of Varys coming earlier in the immediate aftermath of Duskendale. Yep, that's right, Dark Sister makes an appearance, the famous Valyrian steel sword of House Targaryen. Its fate is unknown, but it's believed to have disappeared with Brynden Rivers when he went missing beyond the wall. That isn't the case in this, or, obviously. It was left behind at the wall and then sent back to King's Landing at some point after Rivers disappeared. Don't forget to drop a kudos and a comment. It means a lot to get your feedback. Until next time. Spectre for Hire. Chapter 8, Discord. Notes. Thanks to Persephone_Lancaster, Dahlia, Sam Loves Sasoyev, Fiercecat, KOF, and the 11th for taking the time and dropping a comment on the last chapter. It means a lot to me to read your feedback. Chapter text. 278 AC. Cersei. Let me look upon my daughter. She stepped forward at her father's command. Standing straight and proud, refusing to show any hint of weariness from the long travels. Her wheelhouse having only just arrived to the city, and when it reached the Tower of the Hand, she was immediately summoned by her father. Cersei understood she didn't have the luxury of such complaints, especially when the recipient to them was her father. So she kept quiet and still, and waited for her father to address her. She hadn't seen him since his last visit to the Rock, which had been almost a year ago, but as she looked at her father before her, he looked much the same. He sat behind his desk, his quill in his hands, scratching the tip of it along the parchment, face set in concentration. Satisfied, he put the quill down and raised his head. His sharp green eyes with flecks of gold met Cersei's gaze, who was quick to curtsy, which she did flawlessly. Father, she followed up with while standing up from her bow. Daughter, he returned the greeting, his expression unreadable. His eyes then flicked to the silent servants and guards throughout the room. Leave us. His commanding tone sent them scuttling out of the room. It was only when the last one left, did his eyes return to her. A smile slowly came to his mouth that alleviated the seriousness of his expression. You are beautiful, child. He raised his hand and gestured for her to come closer. Silently thrilled at her father's words, she moved to cut the distance between them, seeing him stand from his seat. Even in her growth these past few years, he still seemed to tower over her. When they were within reach, his strong arms gently were put upon her. As he embraced her, a light kiss to her forehead followed. "How is your mother?" "She is well," Father Circe answered while relishing the affection and attention from her father. "Good," he sounded pleased. "She is a strong woman, but she is still a mother." The embrace ended, but his hands remained on her shoulders. "I am sure she is cross with me for having taken you after already having Jaime in the capital with me." A faint amusing glint could be seen in his eyes, making the flecks of gold stand out even more. "Where is Jaime?" She had expected some sort of greeting from her twin, whether at the city gates or at the Tower of the Hand, but he was nowhere to be found or seen. An absence that annoyed her, and though she wouldn't admit especially to her twin, but hurt her. "He is with the Prince," Tywine answered. "He and Prince Daeron have become good friends since your brother came to the capital." Her father's tone was rich with approval at the friendship struck between the two young men. The spare prince, she thought sourly. Why couldn't he befriend Rhaegar? The man who would one day be king. Was Jaime so foolish as to not understand the benefits that would come from being able to call such a powerful man a friend? Or even better, the power that could be his if he had the trust of a king. I see. Circe left her thoughts on her brother's poor decisions to herself. It seemed it fell solely on her to win Rhaegar's affection. Help from her twin would have been a boon, but she should have known better than to rely on Jaime for anything, unless you needed something hit with a sword or to be told some dumb jape. "Your brother is doing his part," Circe, her father said, as if sensing her internal disappointment in Jaime. She looked up to see his eyes were on. There was no longer a glint to be seen or a smile on his lips. A mask of stone had been slipped over, replacing any familiar hint that was she looking upon her father. "It is time for you to do your part." "I understand," Father Circe said at once, not wanting even a second of doubt to pass in his mind that he couldn't rely on her. That pleased him. He nodded, his hands giving her shoulders a squeeze before he dropped them to his side, and returned to his seat. Circe took the silent instruction and moved around the desk to one of the seats in front of him. "The time of waiting is over," he continued. "Many lords have sent their daughters or sisters here in hopes of snaring the crown prince." A look of annoyance crossed over his expression. "Regardless of these pitiful attempts, none of them possess your beauty." He tilted his head towards her, "or the wealth and power of our family." The urge to wilt under the pressure placed upon her shoulders was great, and had she been another woman, she may have, but she was not them. She was a lioness of the rock. Circe understood her duty and the expectations placed upon her by her father. She would make him proud. She had to. "Give me time, father, and I will have Rhaegar himself make the request to the king," she informed him, hoping her tone sounded confident to her father's ears, while ignoring the slight trepidation that rooted itself through cold tendrils within her stomach. Thankfully, he seemed to have believed her, and to her relief and a boost to her confidence, her father rewarded her words with a smile that she took as pride. "I know," he assured her, and then the smile was gone. "You must be tired from your travels. Bathe and rest. We do not want Rhaegar's first impression of you since you've flowered to be of a dirty and tired woman." His attention returned to the papers on his desk. The signal was clear. She was dismissed. Circe stood from her seat, trying to ignore the slight sting she felt at her father with his parting words and action. As slowly as she could without looking like she was dallying, walked across his office, hoping for him to stop her, to give her one last affectionate smile or parting, but all she felt was disappointment when she reached the door and was given only silence. She looked over her shoulder to see her father engrossed in his work, and with that last sight, she slipped out of his office and made for her chambers. Sister, her twin, ambled into the room, hours later. Circe looked at him from her seat at her vanity, knowing at once from his appearance that he had been in the sparring yard. His hair was disheveled, face sweaty, crimson tunic was wrinkled, and his trousers were dirty. He didn't even bother to change before greeting her. Anger lashed within her chest at her brother. Here she sat, wrought with nerves that slithered inside her stomach like eels. While here her brother stood without a care in the world, who couldn't even be bothered to greet her when her caravan arrived. It was maddening. Was she the only one who had her family's interest first? Did he care nothing of her plight? She mused, feeling a pang of pain at the possibility that her twin could. Was he that selfish to not even consider her feelings and fears at what was put before her? "I can do this," she thought to herself, trying to still the doubt that had nested itself within her, gnawing away at her confidence and her poise. The excitement and infatuation of being Rhaegar's wife and queen melting away upon realization at the trying task before her. Her father was already rejected once by King Aeus in a match between her and his son and heir. Who is to say this time will be different? Cersei, a look of concern touched his face, eyes searching hers. Is something troubling you? He tentatively made his way towards her as if afraid she may either flee or attack him if he got too close. Yes. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. She couldn't handle if her brother reacted with a laugh or a jape at her expense, exposing her fear for his amusement. She faltered, I'm just tired from my travels. He frowned, not looking fooled by her lie, but she was thankful when he didn't press. It can be exhausting, he admitted. It is a long road from here to the Rock. His voice softened at the mention of their home. How's Tyrion? Tears pricked her eyes as the memory of her brother sobbing in their mother's arms clawed its way back to the forefront of her mind. He didn't handle it well. She dabbed at her tears with a swift flick of her fingers. Jaime didn't see the movement as he had ducked his head. I will speak to father, he said after a few heartbeats of silence, to see if he will allow Tyrion to travel here. You know father's answer, Cersei pointed out sadly. His head darted up. What would you have me do? He growled, eyes flashed angrily, but she wasn't certain at who the anger was directed at, her or inwardly towards himself. Just as quickly the anger dissipated and a look of remorse spread across his face. Forgive me, he sounded sincere. I miss him dearly. I know she missed him too, and she had only just left while Jaime hadn't visited the Rock in months. Have you been shown around? No, she answered, silently hoping that Prince Rhaegar would give her the honor, but she realized that was a silly dream, and one she must abandon if she planned on getting his attention. I cannot rely on him to seek me out, she reminded herself. I must search for him. I am the lioness, the hunter. Then allow me to remedy that. He held out his arm for her, a way to atone for not being here when you arrived. Very well, she acquiesced, realizing this was her chance to learn about her new surroundings. She stood from her vanity and joined her brother. Cersei tucked her hand into the nook of his arm, and couldn't help but wonder when was the last time she was this close to him. Or the last time they were this civil to one another. Jaime looked pleased. Good, let us begin. While informative and more fun than she would have thought, Cersei couldn't shake the disappointment that clung to her when she and Jaime reached her chambers. It wasn't the end of the tour that made this feeling of dissatisfaction churn in her, but what they didn't see during it. There had been no sign or hint of the presence of the Crown Prince, the target of her father's ambitions and her affection. There had been plenty of servants and guards, but no dragon had been seen during their walk through the castle and surrounding grounds. It's only your first day, a soft voice reminded her, which to her sounded like that of her mother. Attempting to soothe away the bubbling discontent in her stomach. A day wasted all the same, another voice spoke up, rigid and stern, her father's voice. She wanted to sigh, to cry, the nerves tangled in her tummy like wrestling snakes. All stemming from one man, her beloved Crown Prince, and the responsibility that fell on her. I cannot chafe from my duty, she reminded herself. Cersei. Her brother's voice and the lilt of his tone brought her eyes to him. He was standing in front of her. His lips pressed. She recognized the look easily enough. He was her twin after all, and knew he had something on his mind. It was lovely, brother, she recited, believing he had asked her about the tour when her mind had wandered. Thank you, she added. It was seeing his reaction did she realize she erred in her judgment about what it was she thought her brother had been saying to her. Are you well? I'm fine, she replied, sharper than she intended, watching her brother wince at her tone. My apologies, Jaime. She sat down at the edge of her bed, thankful for the reprieve and comfort of her soft mattress. Is it, father? Jaime surprised her with his question. No, she answered too quickly to sound convincing. She expected her brother's stupid grin and foolish jape at having been caught in a lie, but she received neither. Instead, her brother was looking at her with something she hadn't seen since they were younger, sympathy. It should have angered her. She didn't want pity or sympathy. She demanded respect, adoration, not this, and especially not from her brother, but she found herself too tired to muster any sort of anger to punish him, mulling in sullen silence as she was beginning to think her task was doomed before it could even start. The Crown Prince. He guessed, green eyes searching her face, and even in her pride she knew she couldn't contest his answer with a convincing lie, so she nodded. He sighed at that, his boots scuffed the floor. I'm sorry, sister. For what? She blinked, confused not just at her brother's sentiment but the words themselves. He looked at her as if it should have been obvious, for not helping you. He sounded contrite, but then something flickered in his eyes, but I can now. He moved to sit beside her. I am not friends with the Crown Prince, but I do know some things about him. Really, you will? She was caught off guard by her brother's offer of help. Feeling her own heart lift at this new torrent of hope that filled her. Of course he answered her, a hand hesitantly hovering over her lap where her hands were resting before he made the decision and placed his on top of hers. Oh, thank you, Jaime. Before she could stop herself, she hugged him, a gesture that caught him off guard given the lateness of his hands reaching her back. She ended the embrace before it could linger and form as a reminder of what they once had and felt when they were children. We're different then, she reminded herself. He has his princess, and soon I'll have my prince. She felt a smile forming on her lips. He spends his time with only a few individuals. He began with his observations, Sir Arthur Dane, John Connington, and the prince's squires, Richard Lunmouth and Miles Mouton. It was the first name that stuck to Cersei while the others were listed. She knew of the famous knight and had been told of his strong friendship with the Crown Prince. It was that friendship that worried her since it gave the knight's sister, Ashera Dane, an advantage that Cersei didn't have. Sir Arthur, she said casually, he has a sister here, doesn't he? Jaime grinned. Subtle was never you, Cersei. He followed his joke with a gentle poke to her side. Jaime, she admonished with no heat, which only earned a chuckle out of her brother. She rolled her eyes. You said you'd help, she reminded him. And I am, he pointed out, but it doesn't mean I cannot have some fun at your expense, his grin intact. He could tease her all he wanted if it got her closer to Rhaegar, so she let it stand, putting aside any mild annoyance that her brother seemed to provoke within her without effort. However, she hadn't expected a smile to leak through, knowing it would only encourage him if he saw it, and to her misfortune he did. A smile from my sister, he sounded smug. Will this day of wonders cease? Jaime, that had gotten her smile to disappear. He only chuckled. I know, sister, I know. He held up a hand. I was going to say you do not have to worry about Lady Ashera actively pursuing the Crown Prince. What? Cersei's eyes widened at once at this boon. What do you mean? The Dornish beauty has become smitten with another. She couldn't believe this fortunate turn. By all aspects this Lady Ashera was to be Cersei's greatest rival in her task of getting a betrothal with the Crown Prince. Her brother's friendship with Rhaegar, her family's ties to the Targaryens, her supposed beauty, and now she was all but removed from the competition so quickly. The gods favor me, she knew it. They want this union too. They see it as a blessing that will bring prosperity to all of Westeros. She wasn't a pious woman, but she couldn't deny the touch of the divine in this move. Aren't you at all curious who the lucky fellow is? Jaime's question broke through Cersei's elation, to have won your rival's affection. Who is he? She asked more for her brother's benefit than her own, but mayhaps, I'll toast to him later, she smiled, on my wedding day with my prince. Ned Stark. Daeron. Shall we go again? Daeron extended his hand to his fallen opponent, Eddard Stark. His friend took the offered hand with a grateful nod. Well struck, my prince, Ned complimented when he got back to his feet. However, I'll have to decline. Of course, Daeron replied, grateful that his two new friends had agreed to spar with him these past few days to help prepare him for his duel. Seven Hells. Robert Baratheon was standing off to the side, arms crossed. Aren't you tired? In truth he was tired, and sore, but that didn't matter. He was determined to beat Rhaegar to win Dark Sister for himself. If that meant some temporary discomfort in the meantime, then he considered it a bargain. I can use one more bout. He ignored the ache in his arm, muscles protesting from the exertion he's put his body through not just this day, but the last several. He had extended his training from its already rigorous level to improve and ready himself for this fight, expecting it to be the toughest challenge he's yet faced. What do you say, Robert? Daeron offered. Your footwork could improve. My footwork? Robert grumbled. Give me my bloody hammer. He tossed his practice sword to the ground in disgust, and I'll beat you soundly. Sabaristan Selmy cleared his throat from where he stood, an amused smile on his lips. My Prince, Robert amended with a bow. Daeron laughed. I'll remember that. He had seen his friend's prowess with his newly forged warhammer, and was impressed with Robert's skill and strength to wield such a massive weapon. Very well, I suppose I have no choice, but to call it a day with my practice. He handed his blunted sword to a waiting page, who took it with a bow. "'Bout bloody time," Robert mumbled, a hearty chuckle followed his teasing tone. "Forgive me for wanting to be diligent with my training." "You're forgiven." Robert waved his large hand as if swatting aside Daeron's apology. "You spoil me, cousin." Daeron grinned, earning a laugh from Robert. Whatever annoyance he felt at having to call it quits for his day's training was snuffed at his cousin's infectious laugh. Even though they were tied by blood, Daeron had rarely interacted with his cousin, the last time having been years ago. He was fortunate that mistake had been amended. He had stumbled into this newfound friendship with not just his cousin, but of Eddard Stark too, who like Robert was fostering in the Vale as wards of Lord Arryn. When they had arrived to the capital to see off Robert's father and mother from their journey, it was Daeron's role to interact and show the two of them the castle, and the city. He later learned that the task to show Ned and Robert around had first been given to Rhaegar, but his older brother had declined and it fell on Daeron. My brother's aloofness knows no bounds, he thought wryly, but in this instance, he was thankful for his brother's indifference and obsession with books and solitude. As it gave him the opportunity to get to know Eddard and Robert, where friendships were quickly struck between them as well as with Jaime. The four of them finding fun in training, hunting, riding, and exploring outside the city. He would miss his two new friends when they went back with Lord Arryn to the Vale, knowing their exit from the capital was approaching. Their stay having already extended twice now on Robert's insistence and charm, but now a day had been set, and they were to leave only 2 days after Daeron's duel. "This duel between you and your brother," Eddard observed delicately, solemn in his reflection. "It doesn't feel right." Daeron wanted to sigh, but restrained himself knowing that his new friend had a different experience with his siblings than Daeron had with Rhaegar. It was difficult for him to understand of such dislike between brothers, and for that obviousness, he envied Eddard. "Makes sense to me," Robert shrugged. "I wouldn't mind a bout between me and Stannis." The imagined fight was enough to make Robert grin. Any chance to have some fun with my brother? Fun? Daeron couldn't help but ask, unable to see what his friend meant. Of course Robert was still grinning. "I'd have a blast hitting him with a blunted sword." Robert Ned sighed, but his lips twitched at his friend's over-the-top antics. That pleased Robert, slapping Eddard on the back. "There it is, Prince," a smile from the solemn Ned Stark. "A rare sighting. I wouldn't expect it again unless he was in the company of a certain Dornish beauty." Robert Ned's smile was swallowed up by a scowl. Robert didn't seem bothered by his friend's change in mood, reacting as if he had expected it. "Easy, Ned." He held up his hands. "It was only a jape, meant no insult to you or her honor." He paused, besides his voice dropped to a whisper, "just an encouraging suggestion." He winked. "My Prince," Sabaristan Selmy cut into the conversation, "if I may." Of course he nodded, falling in step with the night while the playful banter between Eddard and Robert continued uninterrupted, walking ahead of them. "What is it, Sabaristan?" "Your training." "My training?" Daeron frowned. "Did you spot a weakness in my form?" he asked, "a slip-up that Rhaegar could exploit?" "Your brother," the Kingsguard knight said softly. "He's your brother." "I'm well aware of that," Daeron replied tersely. "You never address him as such when you speak of this duel." "It is irrelevant." Daeron felt the annoyance churning in his gut. "He is my opponent. I will beat him. I must," keeping that part to himself, sensing it would only earn him further disapproval. "Listen to you." He shook his head. "It sounds as if this sword means more to you than your own brother." "Of course it does." Daeron snapped, unable to restrain the bubbling anger inside of him. The blunt truth in his statement stunned Barristan. Disbelief covered his face. "My Prince," he mumbled in dismay. "Enough." Daeron held up his hand. He had let this conversation go on long enough. He looked ahead to see Robert and Eddard had stopped, and were looking back at them in confusion. He despised the look that Sabaristan was giving him. Of all people he should know it wasn't him who was responsible for this fractured relationship between himself and Rhaegar. It was maddening that the blame, the disappointment was being put on him. It was Roriger. He wanted to scream, but he stopped himself. Thank you, he forced himself to smile, needing to remain composed as his frustration roiled beneath his chest. I will think on what you said, he lied smoothly, pleased that the knight took it with a nod and returned the smile, his full of relief. Now, if you excuse me, I wish to see my friends off to their chambers. He didn't wait for him to respond, instead going ahead to meet up with Robert and Eddard. Hold still. Viserys giggled in response, disobeying as he did, padding across the floor and out of Daeron's reach. He stopped behind an ornate chair, poking his head around the side. You can't catch a dragon. Daeron smiled at the display of energy and giddiness of his brother. Oh. Having no difficulty playing along, is that a challenge? Viserys bobbed his head up and down, a laugh followed, eyes shimmering with excitement as his feet tapped in place, ready to run away and to keep the game going all day if he could. I needed this, he thought, savoring the levity that only his little brother could give him. A light-hearted distraction that let him not have to worry about the many things on his mind and instead just allowed him to be an older brother. Day. Viserys' voice broke him out of his thoughts. You're not playing. He pouted. Daeron used that instant to move across the room. Viserys squealed in delight as he spun around and began to run away, avoiding being caught, peals of laughter echoing off the walls, as he padded across the floor. It was when he looked over his shoulder did he finally falter, stumbling and losing his balance. He threw out his hands, a worried cry escaped his lips, fearing he was going to fall. He reached for his brother, fingers around his sides, grabbing him before he could tumble. Got you, Daeron bragged, as he then tossed Viserys into the air much to the boy's delight. I'm flying. Viserys cried out. Daeron caught him, enjoying his brother's happiness. Just like a dragon. Viserys sounded thrilled, again. Again. He demanded petulantly. Viserys Daeron didn't like that tone one bit. That isn't how we ask for things. His brother had the sense to look apologetic despite, I'm sorry, he shrunk a bit, can you please, Day? He had a hard time looking stern when his brother called him that. Viserys was too young and struggled to properly pronounce his name, and settled for calling him, Day. A nickname that Daeron hadn't liked at first, especially when Jaime heard him being called by it, but it was one he couldn't deny grew on him over the past few weeks solely due to his brother's charm and innocence. Before he could respond to his brother's request, another voice entered their conversation. Daeron. The voice of his older brother had a way of snuffing the warmth that Daeron had been feeling. His smile slipping from his face, as he slowly turned to the sound of his brother's voice, Roriger. Come to play with us. Viserys was oblivious to the chilly tension that had settled in the room between his two older brothers. Daeron bit down the scoff that threatened to slip. He doesn't know better, he thought sadly, pitying his brother when he learned the same ugly truth that Daeron had discovered. Roriger only cared for Roriger. Not today, brother Roriger answered Viserys, not making an effort to make his tone gentle or assuring when dismissing their younger brother. I need to speak with Daeron. Viserys frowned. We're not done playing. Daeron put a hand on his brother's shoulder to try to calm him. It's all right, Viserys, he said soothingly, we can play later. But Viserys tried to argue. Enough, Viserys, Roriger chided, his indifference faked not cracking as their youngest brother looked on the verge of tears. Your brothers need to speak. Daeron felt anger stir in his gut at his brother's dismissal of Viserys, his fists clenched at his side. Before he could speak, Roriger continued. Sir Arthur will see you to your chambers, Roriger instructed. As his friend and Kingsguard knight, Sir Arthur stepped forward, giving the younger prince an encouraging smile. Come, my prince, he held out his hand. Viserys looked from the knight to Daeron. Do I have to? Yes, he squeezed his shoulder, I shall visit with you shortly. That got Viserys to move, albeit slowly, towards Sir Arthur's outstretched hand, hesitantly taking it as the knight rewarded the move with a friendly smile before leading him out of the chambers. Before the door closed, Viserys looked behind him, and Daeron sent him a reassuring smile before the door closed behind them. You coddle him. Roriger observed bluntly. You ignore him. Daeron snapped back. Roriger sighed, I have much on my mind, brother. I didn't come here to bicker. No, you came here for something. Daeron knew his brother well enough to understand his actions, especially when it involved him. Yes, he admitted. It is about our duel. He paced before the fireplace. That sword is my birthright. That would be Black Pharaoh, my Prince Daeron said. That belonged to the heirs to the Iron Throne, not Dark Sister. He enjoyed seeing the slight slip of annoyance that Roriger showed before swallowing up to resume his stoic veneer. Regardless, Roriger cleared his throat. Black Pharaoh is gone and Dark Sister is here. That sword may serve a purpose in future endeavors, as will I. Daeron scoffed. His brother's stubbornness in believing in these prophecies made him a fool. You're scared. I am not. He declined sharply. That's why you're here. He felt the smile on his lips, relishing at seeing his brother's discomfort. You're scared that I'll beat you. His brother frowned at his words, but offered no rebuke besides an irritated look. You want the sword, but you don't want to earn it. Roriger ignored the accusation. I don't want to fight you, brother. Brother. Daeron laughed. Is that what I am now to you? He shook his head. You can't just come here after ignoring me for years and call me brother and expect me to fall on my sword out of some family obligation. I am the heir to the Iron Throne, Roriger said sternly. I'm going to show all of court what I already know. Daeron confronted him, standing only inches apart from one another. That their perfect prince isn't without his blemishes. Chapter 9, Duel. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 278 AC. Cersei. You know this is a fight, not a feast, Jaime observed through his typical smile in lieu of a greeting. Cersei ignored her brother's jape, taking her seat across from him, and was careful to not ruffle her beautiful dress. She had spent much of the night before and this very morning fretting over what dress to wear for the duel today. After numerous changes and choices, she finally settled for the one she was currently wearing. A red backless dress which was sleeveless. It had black laces sewn through it to offset the red, subtle hinting of the Targaryen's colors and the future she'd soon have wearing them. With a plunging neckline, while her lion head gold collar dangled between her bosom. How could Roriger resist me now? She had thought exultingly when she studied herself in the mirror in this dress. She knew the style was more the reach than either the Westerlands or the Crownlands, and something she typically did not wear. If she had to wear more dresses styled in this way to win her prince's affection, then she'd do it without hesitation. Why should I hinder myself by conforming to one style? Morning to you too, Jaime replied to himself, undeterred by her silence. Morning. She decided it was better to respond to him than continue to hear him prattling on in self-amusement. Despite her brother's earnestness at helping her with Roriger, he still hadn't stopped being his typical self in her presence. That meant japes, stupid smiles, and other annoyances that she had to persevere through in order to get his help. He raised his glass in her direction before taking a sip, and then went back to his meal. Cersei looked down at the spread of food, choosing carefully as to not wanting to get any spills or crumbs on her dress. She settled with some toast and bacon, with some eggs, washing it down with iced milk. You look lovely, sister. Thank you, brother, she replied in kind, looking up to see the sincerity in his expression. There was no lust or stirring beneath those green eyes like she had seen and used to long for when they were younger. He's been blinded by his princess. How is your betrothed? She asked, knowing how he'd adored talking about his future wife. She cared little about her future good sister, but it was easier to ply him out of more useful information when he was happy and distracted, which he always when his betrothed was brought up. Jaime was eating his porridge, prompting him to look up at her question. His spoon in his mouth, a look of surprise covered his face, but that went away swiftly when his thoughts settled towards the princess. A glazed hue in his eyes followed. He put down his spoon, to show a wistful smile. She is well, he answered. I've held back on writing to her until after the duel, looking and sounding put out by this supposed sacrifice on his part. She and Oberyn are very interested on who will win. They probably long for the spare to win. Cersei knew how close the Dornish prince and princess had been with him during their time in Casterly Rock. She kept that disapproval from showing in her expression, instead returning her brother's smile with one of understanding. I'm sure she's waiting eagerly for it. Yes, she is, he nodded. She will probably write a congratulatory letter to the victor, he revealed proudly. Cersei perked up at that. Not liking the idea of this princess writing to her Roriga and offering some form of deceived sincerity of congratulations when he predictably triumphs over his younger brother. She can't worm her way between me and Roriga. Circe crumpled the piece of toast she had in her hand, turning it into crumbs that rained on her plate. Looking down at her hands and the ruined mess of her toast. Jealous. Jaime correctly guessed her mood. No, she wanted to snap, wiping her hands with a napkin. Good, Jaime didn't sound fooled. I mean, it's not like Elia's letter is going to Roriga. What is that supposed to mean? Circe demanded, annoyed at her brother's smug tone. I thought it was pretty simple. He rolled his eyes. It means she's going to be writing to Daeron, not Roriga, he said slowly, as if she was some lackwit. Circe wasn't sure what frustrated her more, her brother's antics or what he was implying. She settled for the latter, responding with a derisive laugh. You think he can beat the crown prince? She shook her head, disappointed in her brother. It seemed his friendship with the spare had diluted his senses. Jaime frowned. You think too little of Prince Daeron. Beneath his green eyes she could see he was insulted by her jab at his friend. Daeron has squired for Sir Barristan for years, he began. He trains and works hard every day, he listed. There is no better swordsman I've fought that doesn't wear the cloak of the Kingsguard. The beginning traces of a sneer forming on his face. It's you who are mistaken, sister. Prince Daeron will beat Roriga. I have no doubt about that. He finished with a look that resembled a parent correcting their child. Circe scowled, stewing in anger at her brother's chiding of her. At how he spoke to her like some foolish little girl. She refused to acknowledge his points. He's jealous, she reasoned, firmly grabbing onto the idea. His jealousy blinds him against the crown prince. Feeling her anger cooling as she saw through Jaime's flaws. He's friends with the wrong prince, she continued. That stupid loyalty causes him to go against Roriga even when he knows who's the better fighter. I'm sorry, Circe. Jaime's apology broke through her thoughts. I know how much he paused as if to find the right word. Care for Prince Roriga, he finished, sounding contrite. I didn't mean to upset you. All is forgiven, brother, she smiled, waving off his apology. How could she be angry with him? She saw through his attempts at trying to protect his friend, the spare prince. It was pity she felt towards her brother, not annoyance. He looked surprised whether it was her smile or her reaction to his apology. She wasn't sure, but he looked relieved that she wasn't mad with him. Good, he smiled. Besides, if he does lose, he said delicately, at least he'll have you to comfort him. They arrived to a packed great hall. The room was buzzing as all of court looked to be in attendance to witness this anticipated duel between the two princes. The cavernous hall almost felt cramped as she and her brother made their way through the throne room. Remembering her mother's lessons, Circe held her head high, chin lifted, her steps measured and dignified as she walked beside her brother. Feeling the eyes fall and linger on her as they cut through the rabble of the lower noblemen and towards where the dueling ring had been set up. Stands had been built and brought in, forming a large circle, and below that was a smaller circle, roped off where the fight would take place. The stand's two openings were on either side, one side the entrance for the nobles to gather and find their seats, the opposing side as to give the Iron Throne and the king who sat upon it a view of the duel. To those who didn't have the luxury of being gifted seats, not wanting to fear missing such an event, so they settled on milling about in the shadows of the stands, listening to the sounds and reactions of the spectators, while silently hoping to catch a glimpse of it, as well as wanting to stay to shower praise on the victor or consolations to the loser. Looking down on the proceedings were the skulls of the Targaryen dragons, with the largest and most fearsome hanging closest to the Iron Throne. Now the empty eyes of these once proud and magnificent beasts watched their masters in silence. There you two are. A booming voice greeted them. Circe looked away from the imposing dragon skulls to see the tall and muscular Robert Baratheon waving a large-sized hand towards them as noblemen and women shrunk back as to avoid the towering Stormlander, who paid their annoyance and frosty glares no heed. Robert Jaime led her over towards the heir to Storm's End. "'Bout bloody time," he grumbled. He clapped Jaime on the back in greeting, a clap so forceful, Jaime's legs buckled. Jaime recovered, still smiling. "I was blessed enough to have to wait and escort my sister," he gestured to her. Robert turned to her for the first time. Standing straight, his large arms bulging, he bowed stiffly, more out of a lack of proper decorum than any sign of disrespect. His black hair, thick and messy, falling loosely over his temple. A bit of red seeped into his cheeks, making his handsome face look a bit flushed, and having heard stories about him through her brother, she knew wine was the cause of it. "So this is Jaime's famed sister," he was grinning, his blue eyes shimmering. He elbowed Jaime. "You're a beauty, my lady." Cersei rewarded his charm with a small smile, not missing how his eyes roamed over her partially exposed chest. She resisted the urge to shudder or to raise a hand to cover herself. "If I have to endure a few lustful and lingering glances in this dress in order to win my prince's attention, then I do it gladly." She held out her hand, knowing etiquette was to be observed, despite her initial thoughts on the man. Handsome he may be, she felt little in her chest at his sight, another pale imitation to try to rival her Rhaegar. He took her hand in his much larger one and placed a surprisingly gentle kiss upon her knuckles, his eyes not leaving hers during the act. "Enough, Robert," Jaime snorted. "My sister is clever enough to see through your charms." Jaime stressed the last word. Robert barked out a laugh, holding up his hands. "My apologies," he joked. "Wouldn't want to offend your father." He winked at her before turning back to Jaime. "We got you seats." He put his hand on Jaime's back. "Best seats around," he boasted. Cersei was left to trail behind them, as Robert had turned his attention and infectious charm towards her brother, the two conversing and laughing as they went. She glanced around for any sight of her beloved prince, and disappointment deflated her heart when she could not spot the silver-haired Rhaegar. "Here we are." Robert's voice dragged her attention away from the dueling circle to see their empty seats. Though made of wood, the seats were cushioned on both the bottom and the back. She was pleased at that, not wanting to feel stiff and uncomfortable while watching her prince triumph. "Told ya, I'd find them," Ned Robert greeted the two who were sitting next to the empty seats. It was then that Cersei spotted the man who could only be Eddard Stark. The northerner dressed in dull greys and browns, he was shorter than Robert by more than a head. His long face and grey eyes set him apart from his handsome friend, but in the wrong ways, she thought. "He seems more fitting as a mouse than a wolf," she wryly observed at the quiet, unassuming second son. "Lady Cersei," he stepped forward when his eyes met hers, "it is an honor to meet you." He bowed his head, his form more practiced and refined than Robert's. "You as well." She smiled towards him. "Jaime speaks highly of you," she added, knowing how men liked to be complimented, and was proven right by the sheepish look he gave in response. "Men can be so simple." "As well he should," a female voice more than happily agreed. Cersei should have noticed her first, but had been distracted by the Northman's drabby appearance. She didn't need an introduction to know of the woman who was standing beside Eddard. The name came to her at once: Ashera Dayne. Much to Cersei's disappointment, the rumors of her beauty were not unfounded. Begrudgingly seeing it with her tall and slender form, her long curly black hair, but her most striking feature were her violent eyes. An envious trait that was found mostly of those with Valyrian blood, and one that Cersei couldn't deny its beauty, having been enthralled by her beloved Rhaegar's eyes for so long. The Dornish beauty was dressed in a violet, sleeveless dress, with a more conservative cut. Silver thread skillfully woven into the fabric to make the style look simple, but on Ashera it accentuated her beauty rather well, Cersei noted to her chagrin. Spotting a white sword crossing a fallen star silver pin that was placed upon the collar of her dress. "Lady Ashera, I presume." Cersei was all smiles to the woman who she thought was to be her biggest rival, only to learn that her eyes were set on a second son instead of the crown prince. "Her poor judgment is my victory." "You presume correctly." Her Dornish accent lilting her words in an effortless way that made her tone sultrier. "Well met," Cersei greeted, seeing how Ashera's praise had turned Eddard's cheeks flushed. "I love your pin," she complimented. Ashera smiled, one of her long fingers gently brushing up against the falling star part. "Thank you," she responded, "a gift from my brother, Arthur, from when I arrived here." She sounded happy when discussing her famous brother. "He wanted me to not forget where we come from." They moved to sit down then. Cersei sitting down beside her brother, who sat on Robert's left while Eddard sat to Robert's right, with Ashera taking the seat beside him. "Sound advice," Eddard put in, the color having returned to his cheeks. Ashera rewarded his response with a dazzling smile, before brushing her hands against one of his. "Indeed, it is aware of the effect her touch was having on him, though that doesn't mean I haven't tied a different sigil for a new pin." She emphasized her meaning by tapping the grey sprinting direwolf that was sewn upon Eddard's tunic. Robert laughed, a thunderous noise that drew the attention of several onlookers. "I'm not sure what will make him faint first, my lady," he joked, "this heat or you." Ned sent his friend an annoyed look at the teasing, but Ashura put a hand on his arm. "Don't be angry, Ned," she comforted him. "Robert's simply jealous since the best look he's gotten while he's been here was from the roasted boar we supped on last night." Cersei couldn't contain the laugh that slipped from her lips at that. Ned and Jaime's laughter joined hers, and even Robert didn't seem bothered by it. His laughter easily drowning theirs out before shaking his head and wagging his finger at Lady Ashura. "I'm about to be a few dragons richer," Robert bragged, once their laughter subsided. "You've been placing bets on the duel," Eddard observed in dismay, before a resigned look settled over his plain features as if he shouldn't have been. "Of course," Robert happily declared, "just supporting my friend," he defended, ignoring Eddard rolling his eyes or Jaime shaking his head. "Largest one came from Lunmouth. Roriger's squire." Jaime guessed. Robert answered. He seemed confident that the Crown Prince would win. He snorted, conveying his opinion on the matter. Cersei ignored Robert's lack of respect towards the Crown Prince. She knew in current company they called the second son a friend. Like Jaime, they were all tied to loyalty not sense, and would be proven the heir of that when Roriger bested his younger brother in front of them. After that, Cersei paid little attention to their conversation. Robert and his personality dominating it, but he was quick to be quiet when any of the other three spoke up. Cersei let them have their trivial talks as she looked around the stands, spotting familiar and unfamiliar faces having gathered, including the seats across from theirs on the other side of the dueling circle. It was the Tyrell party. Dressed in green and gold, she recognized the heir of Highgarden in Mace Tyrell. A handsome enough man with curly brown hair, and a well-trimmed beard, the golden rose brooch upon his green doublet. He sat beside his silver-haired wife, Lady Aeleri, formerly of House Hightower, who looked pretty and poised in her dress. Beside her, Cersei guessed to be Mace's sisters, Janna and Minor, both of which were presumed suitors for Roriger. Janna dressed in a sleeveless green gown with gold trimming that would catch eyes before leading their attention downwards towards her plunging neckline with gold bordering, showing off her ample breast and buxom form. Her dark hair pinned up to show her small neck, the pins in her hair were embedded with gold and emeralds. Beside her sat the youngest Tyrell, Minor. Her dress much more conservative in cut and did little to accentuate her petite form. Her hair was done in a similar style as her sister but without the ornate pins and jewels. She looked bored at the events around her, and also a bit annoyed, and Cersei spotted the reason. On the other side of Minor Tyrell, sat her mother, Lady Olenna Tyrell. Cersei had learned and heard much about the woman dubbed the Queen of Thorns. She hardly looks intimidating, Cersei thought, studying the old woman across from her who seemed to be whispering into Minor's ear, advice that her youngest didn't seem keen on hearing. She was short with greying hair, garbed in the green of House Tyrell, long-sleeved and layered dress, a golden rose pin was nestled at her collar. Her eyes didn't rest, even as she talked to her daughter. They moved about the hall, soon landing on Cersei. Cersei's first instinct was to look away, as if embarrassed at being caught, but she ignored that notion. She met the inquisitive stare of the Tyrell matriarch. A lioness doesn't cower to a rose, she reminded herself, hoping to convey her confidence and power in her look. That's right, this is the face of your future queen. Her stare got her nothing other than an amused smile that slowly spread on Olenna's face. Murmuring from the crowd broke out, drawing both their attention away and towards the dueling ring where a herald had emerged. It was time to begin. Her heart was racing. Barely hearing what the herald was saying, bits of it that stuck told her that he was going over the rules of the duel. When he finished, he then announced the small council, each lord earning a different volume of applause. When her father was announced as Hand, Cersei was proud to observe he earned the loudest ovation. Regardless, Tywin Lannister ignored the noise and took his seat at the small council table positioned beneath the Iron Throne. Next the herald announced the king, Aerys II, who looked ghoulish. His white hair a tangled, matted mess that had grown long and untamed, falling over his eyes like a silvery curtain. His nails were yellow and long. She had heard rumors that the king forbade any of his servants to clip them since Duskendale. Even in his haggard appearance, he stood before the Iron Throne, soaking in the applause that was directed towards him, the loudest coming from Mace Tyrell and the members of the Reach. It seemed lost on him that their reaction was out of fear not love. When it ended, he smiled, showing yellow teeth through a crusty silver beard before he made his ascent up the steps of the Iron Throne. A baffling sight, she thought, at seeing such a man sitting on the imposing Iron Throne. He looked more fitting on the streets of the city than sitting on the most impressive seat in all of Westeros. An observation she made quietly and dared not share even to her brother beside her. Aware of the wrath it could bring if it was brought to his ears. He was still their king. When he was settled upon his throne, he waved for the herald to continue, who did so but not before bowing low in his direction. I present to you, the challenger, Prince Daeron Targaryen. The herald's announcement brought with it a smattering of applause. The loudest coming from where she sat, as she ducked her head in embarrassment at the raucous cheers that Robert bellowed down in show of support for his friend. Entering the dueling circle, Daeron Targaryen was dressed in gold and black plate armor. The three-headed dragon etched on his breastplate, a shimmering golden silhouette. Those are the young dragon's colors, Jaime informed her, sounding proud at the selection his friend had made. Cersei didn't find it in her to care who or why he chose said colors. She was more pleased that she'd be able to tell the difference between the Spare and her prince when the fighting started. Walking beside Daeron was Segwayne Gaunt of the Kingsguard, dressed in the pale enameled armor of his brotherhood. The knight carried Daeron's sword and helmet. The latter was carved to resemble a dragon's head, with the flap opening to signify the dragon's maw when roaring or billowing flames. Done in black, except for the dragon's eyes, where two golden pieces had been placed into the helm. The herald acknowledged the prince's presence with a bow, sharing a few whispered words which the prince took with a nod before stepping away. The herald then cleared his throat, the Prince of Dragonstone, heir to the Iron Throne, Rhaegar Targaryen. Cersei had jumped to her seat to applaud. The stands broke into a fury of noise and cheers with others coming to their feet to welcome him. Her heart was pounding into her chest while her eyes raked in the handsome crown prince who stepped into view. He was dressed in midnight black plate armor. His chest plate wrought with rubies that formed the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. His beauty was beyond compare, she drank in the appearance of the man she would one day call husband. She ignored the looks of her brother and friends while she continued in her applause. However, she remained mindful to remain poised in her support, knowing she had her reputation and that of her families to maintain. Accompanying the crown prince was his friend and confidant, Sir Arthur Dayne, the sword in the morning, his famous sword, dawn-sheathed and holstered on the knight's back. The Kingsguard knight carried the prince's sword and helmet, the latter being black with a three-headed dragon crowned at the top. The herald greeted the crown prince just like with Daeron before, with a bow and a whispered exchange. When it broke, Rhaegar walked away and towards Sir Arthur, who presented his prince with his sword and helmet. He took them graciously, before turning to face his brother who had been flicking his sword back and forth, practicing. He seemed to sense his brother's stare since he stopped, and looked to meet Rhaegar's eyes. The two exchanged nothing. No words or gesture was made between them, they simply stared at the other in silence. "My son Aerys announced." The king's greeting was unplanned since the herald had looked ready to announce the beginning of the duel, but instead he stepped aside to defer to the king. Daeron broke eye contact first, turning to face his father, where he was quick to fall to one knee. Rhaegar followed his brother's movement, kneeling from his side. Aerys, who stood above them, looked pleased upon seeing his two sons kneeling before him. "You fight for the honor to wield Dark Sister," he began, "may this bout of skill decide who is worthy to carry our family heirloom." He raised one of his hands, showing scabs and scars from where the throne had pricked him. "Let this be a show of my affection towards my blood at such a gift." He finished in his ramblings, sitting down, where he was quick to fidget from the Iron Throne's embrace. The herald waited a few seconds of silence to make sure the king was done before signaling to Sir Barristan Selmy, who stood just outside of the dueling circle and who would act as judge. While his brethren, Sir Jonnet Hordiary and the Lord Commander, Gerald Hightower, stood at the base of the Iron Throne. Only two of the fabled knights were missing from the Great Hall, Sir Oswell Went and the newest member of their brotherhood, Sir Alisa Thorne. Cersei suspected they had drawn the unenviable task at protecting the Queen and the youngest prince, Viserys. They were both absent from the Great Hall. But before she could wonder about their absence, the herald announced the duel would begin, and the Queen and Prince were abandoned as Cersei's eyes fell on Rhaegar, her heart and mind focused solely on him. "Daeron. Begin." the herald announced before scurrying out of the ring. Daeron remained where he stood, looking to see his brother before him. His sword in hand, but his footing betrayed his intentions. He looked prepared to defend, not attack. "You stand before destiny," little brother Roriger's voice was muffled by the helm, but it couldn't stifle his brother's melancholic tone. "I've seen the future, and you are but a bump along my path to fulfill my destiny in saving the Seven Kingdoms." Daeron ignored his brother's words. He didn't care about his talk of prophecies. He moved forward, sword raised, but his movement remained methodical. Daeron didn't rush himself or charge forward. He moved in slowly, a wary predator. His brother was taller and had the greater reach, so Daeron was careful with his steps. He initiated the duel when he was in range with a simple sword thrust which Roriger deflected. The clash of swords brought a roar of approval from the crowd. Undeterred, he continued, thrust and poking, looking for weaknesses in his brother's stance while watching his form. Roriger skillfully blocked each one, and acted inclined to stay on the defense, not looking or trying to offer any form of counter-attack. "Be thankful that this burden hasn't fallen on you." Roriger's tone held a touch of sadness to it, harrowingly echoing out from his helm. Daeron wondered for just a second if the crowd could hear the exchange between brothers, before deciding they probably could not, judging by the noise emanating from the stands. "Am I supposed to forgive you?" He had no disposition to do so. His sword going low in a jab that Roriger deftly swatted aside. "No," his brother answered, "nor do I ask you to understand." That was when he changed his technique, relying on his reach. Roriger moved his sword in a swift cutting arc which brought a loud reaction from the audience, their support clear and deafening. He ignored the noise, focusing on his brother's blade while chiding himself for letting him be lulled into Roriger's conversation. He met Roriger's blade, absorbing the strength from the blow. A discomforting strum went up his arm. Daeron then sidestepped to try to free their locked blades. A move Roriger predicted, since his sword came rushing to meet him, slicing downwards, and Daeron dodged the blade the best he could. Hearing the air ripple from the blade which missed him by mere inches, earning gasps and groans from the audience. Daeron recovered, watching Roriger coming back towards him, unleashing a series of cuts and thrusts that Daeron dodged and deflected. Each one, his brother's blade, crept closer and closer towards him. He bit back a huff when the last one nearly scraped his armor, but then Roriger changed his position, stepping to his side and throwing up his elbow which connected to the side of Daeron's head. Pain exploded from the spot, wincing and cursing. His head rattled beneath his helm. He stumbled, but kept his sword up, swinging it back and forth to ward off another attack from his brother while Daeron tried to regain his balance. His vision blurred. He tasted blood in his mouth. "Prince." Sabaristan's voice could barely be heard over the excitement of the crowd, who chanted and cheered for their crown prince. "Do you yield?" Daeron couldn't pinpoint Baristan's voice or where the knight was standing to the circle. No, he lifted up his helm's visor, spitting out blood much to the delight of the crowd. "I can continue." He was thankful that this wasn't a fight to first blood. His eyes on Roriger, whose helm remained on, poised for another attack. He was also closer to Daeron than he realized, for as soon as he said he'd fight, Roriger moved to cut the distance. Relying on his reach to keep Daeron off balance, so that he exploit Daeron's defenses, while being far enough back so as Daeron couldn't threaten him. Daeron kept visor up, allowing him unobstructed view of his brother and his style. "You've been learning from your friend," he realized, seeing techniques his brother was using that Daeron had watched Sir Arthur perform flawlessly in the training yard. Thankfully, he wasn't fighting the sword in the morning, but his brother. Undeterred by this setback, Daeron settled in his defensive stance, deflecting and rarely absorbing his brother's hits, instead sending them to the left and right of him, avoiding taking any of the impact fully. He didn't want to overexert himself on the defense with Roriger trying to sap his energy with each flurry of attacks. It was in blocking Roriger's latest effort that Daeron had decided he had given enough ground. Instead of deflecting this one, he planted his feet and embraced the attack full force. He ignored the discomfort that climbed up his arms, focused on their blades which were locked together. Until Daeron pushed Roriger's aside, and with a flick of his wrist, brought his sword towards Roriger's suddenly exposed front. He thrust forward, the blade slashing Roriger's chest plate. The crowd voiced their displeasure at the turn of events in the form of shouts and curses. all of which were directed towards Daeron. The Crown Prince stumbled backwards, sword flailing in his hand, but Daeron avoided the careless strikes. He moved his sword downwards in a brutal cut which hit Roriger's shoulder. The impact of sword against armor let out a loud thud and he could hear his brother's groan. Roriger's free arm sagged. He raised his sword towards Daeron to try to fend him off, as he backed away, his back going up against the ropes of the dueling ring. Roriger. Barristan's voice rang above the restless noise of the crowd, "Do you yield?" He answered with a mute shake of his head, and that was all Daeron needed to move forward. He swatted Roriger's sword away, his brother's strength was wilting. When their swords met, he changed the angle of his blade, grabbing the bare steel by his armored gloves and flipping it in one fluid motion where he then directed a thunderous pommel strike to the front of Roriger's helmet. Roriger nearly fell over the roped rings from the strength behind the blow. The crowd's buzzing grew louder like a swarm of angry insects as they watched their beloved prince getting bludgeoned by Daeron. He didn't mind, he enjoyed it, savoring the sound of their discomfort and frustration as he went about showing their damaged perfect prince. He rushed towards Roriger ready to end this duel, but his brother regained his footing, and threw up his sword to deflect his charged strike. Daeron's sword bounced off Roriger's defense, and he took a step back, not wanting to be careless this close to victory. "I will not have this triumph taken from me," taking a breath, sword poised. His heart thundered against his ribs, a war drum beneath his chest plate. Roriger seized the brief respite to remove his helmet to the gasps of his adorning subjects to reveal his face was a bloody mess. His nose was broken with blood pouring out from the wound. Daeron smirked. "My prince." Barristan sounded dismayed at seeing the heir in such a state. "Do you yield?" Roriger answered by tossing his helmet aside. His face marred in anger, blood smeared across his mouth and chin. His indifference crumbling beneath a snarl that would have made the dragon skulls above them proud, he lashed out with his sword. Daeron met his brother's rage. Their blades clashed, their faces inches apart. His breathing was labored, and he could hear Roriger's heavy breaths as well as the wheezing coming from his broken nose. While Roriger had unleashed his rage, Daeron kept his contained. Feeding it slowly, the anger stirred in his chest like a hungry chained beast. Funneling through his body, relieving his tired muscles, subsiding the discomfort and pain that had been seeping through. His strength buoyed as the battle song coursed through his blood. Daeron's rage, his fire was stoked and carefully preserved, controlled so that he could use it. Draw on it, but never drown in it. This was the blood of the dragon. The rage of their ancestors that brought them glory and triumphs as they conquered Westeros. A fury that swept across the kingdoms only sated by fire and blood. Their opponents fell one by one to the wrath of the dragon. This was the blood of Aegon the Conqueror, the young dragon, Aemon Dragon Knight, some of the greatest warriors Westeros had ever seen. This is my blood too. Roriger had let his rage consume him, a costly folly, that Daeron would exploit. Their attacks brought them within inches from each other, only steel separating the fighting dragons. "You thought destiny was a shield," brother Daeron growled, low and menacing. The dragon stirred within him, chained, but angry. "It's nothing more than a blindfold." He loosened his posture, his sword dropping as the shift in stance and lack of resistance led Roriger to stumble forward. His sword flailing like a damaged wing, but Daeron deftly avoided it. Bringing his pommel up and delivering a brutal strike on the back of his brother's head to the disappointment of the crowd, save for a loud cheer which he knew came from his cousin. The blow sent Roriger reeling, falling to the ground face first in an armored heap, body sprawled out, sword out of reach. Daeron stalked him, wary of any sign of deception, feeding off the rage that burned within. When he was close, he kicked aside Roriger's sword. He then stepped on Roriger's arm, pinning it to the ground, and pressed his sword to the back of Roriger's exposed neck. Barristan rushed over to their side of the dueling ring. "Roriger." His voice wrought with worry. "Do you yield?" Daeron pressed his blunted blade harder onto the neck of his brother, applying more and more force in hopes of making sure Roriger didn't have any foolish notion to continue this fight. "I yield." He conceded, face in the ground. The crowd let out a collective gasp, groans followed. Daeron removed his sword from his brother's neck, and stepped away from the bleeding and injured Roriger. Pycelle had hobbled down from the small council table to check on the crown prince. He was quickly assisted by some of his acolytes. They brought bandages to try to sop up the blood as the Grand Maester assured him he could fix the injury. Relishing the rush of victory, Daeron removed his helm, welcoming the air that greeted him with such a sweet caress. "My prince." He turned to see his sworn shield, Sir Gaunt standing before him. His face impassive, but he handed Daeron a towel which he took gratefully. He used it to wipe away the layer of sweat that had coated his face. "You fought well, my prince." "Thank you, Sir Gawain." His heartbeat was beginning to settle as the dragon calmed in its lair. Its strength waning while the soreness and exhaustion began to creep back into his bones and muscles. What a fight! Robert made his way down from the stands, cutting a path through the audience which remained in a state of dismay upon viewing their perfect prince get bested. The thought of their disappointment made his victory all the sweeter. Daeron smiled. "Cousin," he greeted his friend, clapping him on the shoulder. "You won me good coin." Robert bragged. "I'm glad my good fortune turned into your good fortune," Daeron joked. "Well fought." Jaime was next to offer his congratulations. "I noticed that counter you used against him." He was smiling. "You can thank me for teaching you that." Daeron laughed, shaking his head. "Congratulations, my prince." Eddard's was more tempered than Robert and Jaime's, but just as sincere. "Thank you." Daeron smiled, knowing the action revealed blood-stained teeth. His friend's conversation was cut off as clapping echoed across the great hall. A single smattering of sound that brought everyone's attention to the Iron Throne where his father was sitting. "My son, you have earned your victory." Daeron stepped forward, noticing his brother was still being treated by Maester Pycelle. A cloth applied to his broken nose while Pycelle was applying a salve to the area around the wound. A gaggle of his friends and squires hovered nervously around their crown prince. He saw the glare that John Connington sent his way, and Daeron responded with his red smile. When he was at the edge of the dueling circle, he knelt, lowering his head. "Thank you, my king." "Well." Aerys stood from his seat, eyes roaming the stands of nobility. "What do you have to say for my son's victory?" "Your prince." His prodding brought with it a hesitant reaction from the crowd as they clapped half-heartedly with their congratulations. "You showed the might of the dragon today, my son." Aerys sounded giddy. He carefully climbed down the steps. "Come forward, child." He beckoned him closer when he reached the dais of his throne. Daeron stood from his kneeling position, climbing out of the ring and up the steps to where his father was waiting for him, and beside him there was a servant holding onto a red velvet cushion where Dark Sister rested. "The sword of Aemon the Dragon Knight has found a worthy heir." "You honor me, your grace." Daeron ducked his head to his father while shooting a glance to the famous family sword that he had just earned. "Yes, I do." Aerys agreed happily. "I am a good king," he proclaimed, his eyes darting around the room, his mouth pursed in a suspicious frown, as if expecting dissidents to speak up and challenge his claim. "So witness my generosity." He raised his arms to draw attention from the crowd. "Take it, my son." Daeron reached for the sheathed Valyrian longsword, his fingers carefully wrapping around the pommel before he lifted it from the pillow. "Your winner," Aerys II declared, putting his hand on Daeron's shoulder where they were met with applause from a frazzled audience. Daeron stood awkwardly, not wanting the attention of these strangers. It was the sword he had valued, not the adoration of the fickle court. Regardless, he knew what was expected him, and stood quietly beside his father, looking down towards everyone who stood below them. His friends were the loudest and sincerest in their support. "Remember this, my son." His father's soft voice brushed against his ear. "My gift to you, Dark Sister. Use it to protect your king against his enemies." His father tightened his grip on Daeron's shoulder. "From both outside our family." His father's attention flickered towards the injured Roriger, "and from within." Notes. So there we have it. Maybe I should apologize first off, as I know expectations to this duel were high and growing, and I still struggle writing fight scenes. So if I failed to deliver, then you have my apologies. I hope no one minds my creative liberties when describing the Dragon's Rage. I thought it'd be a fun, neat concept to explore, since we know and it seems hinted at that the Targaryens are different with their Valyrian blood. Thanks for all the support you give this story. It really means a lot to me to receive your feedback. So please don't hesitate to hit that review button. They are delightful treats for the muse, who is never sated. Until next time. Spectre for Hire. Chapter 10, Duality. Notes. I'd like to extend my appreciation to Nikolai161, Persephone_Lancaster, Point Given, Armansky1, Golden_Daughter, Fiercecat, that_emo_kid_in_the_corner, and ESO4 for taking the time to leave a comment. It means a lot to me to read your feedback. So thank you. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. 278 AC. Daeron. The Godswood was quiet when Daeron stepped out into it. Dim torches lined the various pathways that cut through the wood. He closed his eyes, appreciating the gentle tussle of the wind against his face. The cold brisk air was a welcome change to the stuffy and smoky ambience of the celebrating he had excused himself from. He and his friends drinking to his victory over Roriger. His fingers brushing against the sheathed sword that he had won in his duel hours ago. The famous sword of his ancestors, Dark Sister. He had admired the Valyrian blade countless times since he had claimed it, showing it to his friends and new supporters of his that have sprung up since his victory. His mouth twisted at those vermin. Their attempts at worming into his good graces were not lost on him. As if he'd forgotten their behavior in the past, and was foolish enough in thinking they wouldn't turn on him the second it was convenient for them. The court could hang as far as Daeron was concerned. Oh. Daeron looked ahead of the path he was walking to see a young woman was approaching him. My prince, she recovered, curtsying. He recognized her to be Mina Tyrell, Mace Tyrell's youngest sister. My lady, he greeted, I apologize for startling you. It's quite all right, she waved off his apology. I took the risk by venturing into this wood at night, she explained. I should have prepared myself in the chance I came face to face with a dragon. Daeron found himself smiling at the young woman in front of him. You are brave, he complimented. His eyes taking in her slender form, her green dress done in a conservative cut. She had big blue eyes, honey brown hair that had been done in a braid, but strands of it had slipped through, framing her lovely face. And beautiful, he found himself adding. She smiled, I'm sure you tell that to all the women you meet in the moonlight. He had difficulty looking away from her eyes, sapphire pools that in the moment shimmered with a mischievous glint. I didn't mean to interrupt your stroll. He took a step to the side, allowing her to pass, while secretly hoping that this conversation wouldn't come to a sudden end. I'll admit I came out here to escape my mother, she confessed, but I wouldn't protest your company. Silently pleased, he offered her his arm. Allow me. Her small hands were tucked against him. They then set out on their leisurely pace through the Godswood. Your mother is a very formidable woman. Daeron knew the stories of the Queen of Thorns. He had rarely found himself in her company, but had heard the lash of her tongue, and the barb in her words. So am I. She squeezed his arm, before letting out a laugh which sounded like music to his ears. He chuckled, I'll remember that. Allow me to offer my congratulations on your victory, she spoke up, after they had walked a few steps in silence. I cannot say what I enjoyed more, your thrashing of the Crown Prince or the looks of my brother and sister once you were finished, she giggled. I thought my sister was going to faint. Daeron didn't reply right away. His mind dwelling on her reveal of wanting him to beat his brother. Unaware of his internal debate, she continued in her story, my brother swallowed his tongue in that defeat. The first silence I've ever experienced in his company. So you have my thanks. He found it difficult to keep from smiling at her alluring charm. However, the distraction of his thoughts was enough to keep his mood somber despite the infectious mirthfulness coming from her tone and expression. That is surprising news. He picked his words carefully, since I thought it was only in my small circle of friends that would be the ones happy with the outcome of my victory. He watched her carefully, when he added, however, in the hours that followed, I've found quite a new group of friends emerging from the woodwork. Mina snorted, catching him off guard, and you suspect I'm one of them? She sounded more amused than insulted. The thought crossed my mind. I'll be honest with you, my prince, she said candidly. My family have had their eyes set on Roriger for years, her eyes darkening. They chase a dragon, a way to put a Tyrell as close as they can to the Iron Throne. You're proving my point. Am I? She challenged. They want Roriger, not you. She said bluntly. A softness touched her face at the admission. She squeezed his arm. They will not even consider you until Rurga is married with a wife who's already given him a handful of sons. Her voice betraying her thoughts on her family's scheming. A man I'm not deemed worthy of. She let out a bitter laugh. No, not as a second daughter. No Targaryen princes for me. I'll be given to a bannerman to strengthen our family's alliances. Her admission brought an eerie resignation to her tone. An acceptance to her fate. A role I'll play for my family, but that's for the future. She slipped her hands from his arm, and moved to take his hands in hers. This night, this moment, she looked into his eyes. That's mine. His eyes flickered between her enthralling blue eyes and her lips, which he yearned to kiss. He found his mouth dry, a slight haziness in his mind that he knew was from the celebratory wine. He wanted to believe her. Her tone was so sincere. Her words captured a sentiment he understood only too well, but still he hesitated on the precipice. Daeron knew how this game was played. How his family was viewed. His hesitation kept his heart from plummeting while praying his wariness was misplaced, because in that moment all he wanted to do was to feel her lips on his. And this. He raised her small and delicate hands. The corner of her lips curved, which only seemed to enhance her beauty. Let my brother and mother fret over the crown prince. Her azure eyes were warm and inviting. Let them throw my sister at his feet, if it means I can have you all to myself. Daeron felt something stir within. Relief welled in his heart like a mountain spring. My prince. A voice called out in the darkness, puncturing the moment between them. A look of disappointment flashed across Miner's face, but her smile returned, smooth and confident as she leaned on her tiptoes. What if I were to come to your chambers tonight? Her lips brushing against his cheek, would you find me a welcoming sight? I would. His voice sounded strange to his ears, like a low rumble. She shivered at the sound, red crept into her suddenly flushed cheeks. Until tonight, my prince. She ducked her head, smirking as she did. That glint lingering beneath her eyes that Daeron found beguiling, like a lit beacon to weary sailors. He watched her slip into the darkness of the night, standing alone, his thoughts and feelings lingering on the youngest Tyrell. My prince. Sir Gaunt emerged from the shadows, out of breath, but that didn't stop him from giving Daeron an irritated look. Sir Gawain, my apologies. Daeron had promised the knight to not wander off, and in return he'd allow Daeron some privacy. I got distracted, he admitted, looking over his shoulder to where Lady Miner had slipped away. Only moments ago, her scent lingered in the air, an enticing floral scent. Evidently, the knight replied dryly. He looked him over, a suspicious look in his eyes, but he voiced none of it out loud. Allow me to escort you back, my prince. Very well, Daeron acquiesced. Your cousin, Lord Robert, has quite the voice and a talent at remembering bawdy songs. They started back towards the keep. Daeron resisted the urge to look backwards, not wanting to confirm any of the knight's suspicions. So instead he looked forward to tonight, remembering the words spoken to him, and of the promises to come. It was nearly an hour later before Daeron found himself walking alone towards his chambers. His encounter with Miner had left him distracted. He hadn't been able to focus with his friends, barely listening or paying mind to what it was they were saying. Thankfully, they seemed oblivious to it, and when he excused himself, citing weariness after his fight, they were understanding, bidding him a good night, and a final congratulations on his triumph before he left them. Here he walked after having beaten his brother, claimed dark sister, but it was Lady Miner Tyrell that had rooted herself at the center of his consciousness. Her beauty and her charm, her boldness and her bluntness forming an unexpected distraction. The fight felt like a distant memory to him, now that his thoughts and desires were focused entirely on the young Tyrell maiden. Upon reaching his doors, he wondered how to discreetly let the guards know to expect Miner, as well as ensuring that her visit went unreported. Pushing the doors opened, his thoughts on alerting his guards were forgotten when he spotted the very guest he was expecting, having already made herself comfortable within his chambers. Lounging on the couch by his fireplace, the orange glow of the burning embers casting her form in an enchanting light. A form he couldn't help but admire. She stirred upon hearing him enter, raising her head. She had removed her pins and braids, allowing her honey brown hair to fall in loose lazy curls past her shoulders. Her lips were the first to react to his sight, forming a smirk that was confident and inviting. My prince, she inclined her head in his direction, I've been expecting you. She gracefully sat up. I wasn't expecting this. He gestured to her presence upon his couch, but one that I'm very grateful at seeing. You're smoother with your sword, my prince, she teased. I invited myself in, she shrugged, elegant in the movement as it drew his attention to the silk nightshift she was wearing. A thin, transparent fabric that hid nothing from his hungry gaze. No easy feat. She noticed his eyes on her, sitting up straighter to allow him a better view of her pale breasts. You're full of surprises, my lady. You have no idea, my prince, she replied impishly, emphasizing his title in a tone that sent a shiver of pleasure strumming through him. She suddenly stood, but remained graceful in her movement, turning her back to him. She walked over towards the table, a seductive sway in her steps. I brought you some arbor gold. You are too kind. He moved over towards her, watching as she poured the golden liquid into 2 glasses. He nodded his thanks at the offered glass. He felt his doubt bubbling up, so he quickly drank the wine, wanting to douse his misgivings before they could distract him further. He finished the delicious wine in 3 sips. Allow me, he offered, when he noticed her glass was empty. He poured them their second glass in silence. Do you find me homely, my prince? Daeron coughed up some of his arbor gold at her unexpected question. My lady. His face burned in embarrassment at his gaffe. He quickly wiped his mouth with the back of his arm. I do not, he assured her. He hesitated to look in her direction, but after warring silently with indecision and nerves, he looked towards her. He found himself emboldened by her beauty, and no doubt, the wine, when he clarified. I find you stunning, my lady. So stunning that you must keep your distance. The challenge in her tone was clear, but softened by the look in her eyes. She looked so fragile, vulnerable. I am cautious. He decided she deserved honesty after all she had told him earlier about her family and her future. I see a touch of pain in her voice. She took a long sip from her glass. I assure you, my prince, I come here to you out of desire of nothing more than the feeling of 2 lovers embracing. She put down her now empty glass. Marrying you would please my family, she admitted, but fucking you would please me. Her eyes luminous in the candlelight, lust shimmering beneath the sapphire pools. Satisfied with her answer, Daeron moved towards her. He was tired of the doubting. He let his concern be numbed by wine and lust. Letting his desire drown his caution, because here and now, he wanted this, he wanted her. Very well, he smiled, I'll indulge you. It was her stirring that called him out of his slumber. Haziness greeted him, he blinked it away only to see darkness surround him. He reached out his hand, his fingertips finding the soft, warm skin of Mina's body beside his. What time is it? He yawned. The hour is late, she answered, however, morning is still far enough away that the skies remain dark, and the castle asleep. His eyes were adjusting to the dim light to see her lying beside him. Her blanket abandoned, he drank in the sight of her breasts, the steady rise and fall of her chest. He reacted to her beauty. Since their bodies were still partly intertwined, it allowed her to feel his appreciation. She smiled, you'd draw your sword on an innocent maiden. Her impish tone only solidifying his growing lust. You're hardly an innocent maiden. Their night of passion confirmed his suspicion that she was no blushing virgin. She laughed, I cannot deny that she didn't sound ashamed at the admission. You were not my first. Her fingers went through his hair, but you were my first prince. He met her lips with his, savoring the soft sweetness of them. The moan that escaped her mouth, only fueled his desire, but she pulled away after a few heartbeats of passion. She purred, smiling as she did, her eyes lingering on his lips. A look of conflict flickering across her face, shadowing her beauty before a look of disappointment settled, a resigned sigh followed. I must leave. She slipped out of bed before he had a chance to try to stop her. I have an explanation in place. She padded across the floor, but I shouldn't risk it. She picked up her discarded shift from where Daeron had peeled it out of her. The memories of their passion coming back to him. He smiled upon reflecting of their time together. It had been a very good night. Despite the temptations to stay, she sent him a playful look over her shoulder, slipping into her shift. I can come again if you like. The offer hung in the air between them. Her tone was casual, but there was a flickering hue of hope beneath her cobalt eyes. I wouldn't be opposed to it, Daeron joked, earning him a glare, but he saw the relief flicker across her face no matter how brief. He pushed the blankets off of him, and got up to meet her. I'd be a poor host if I let you leave without so much as a goodbye. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a brief, but tantalizing kiss. Until our next meeting he was pleased at the dazed look in her eyes. I pray that it isn't too much of a wait. Her glazed look slipped away at his last words, her confidence returning in her familiar smirk. I'm not the maiden, herself she teased, but I'll see what I can do about your prayer. Daeron chuckled, resisting the urge to kiss her once more. He stayed that desire instead, having to settle for watching her put on her rough spun cloak and hood, disguising her into looking like one of the many servants within the Red Keep. An ingenious disguise, he thought, impressed with her planning. Since even if she was noticed, they'd think he was sleeping with a maid. A notion that wouldn't have anyone batting an eye. She looked back at him, before she slipped away out of sight. He stayed there, standing and staring at the closed door, wearing nothing but a dazed smile. Circe. He needs me. She hadn't been able to sleep. How could she rest while her prince was in pain? To make matters worse, she had to endure the celebrations of her brother and his friends as they gloated over the spare prince's victory over the crown prince. Had they no wits? They insulted the heir to the Iron Throne with their jubilee. She lay awake all night fretting over her Roriger. Unable to push away the horrible memories of watching him get bested by that brute of a brother, who in his jealous rage had marred Roriger's face with a savage blow. He couldn't take his brother's crown, so he settled for taking his beauty, she thought bitterly, and his sword. She wouldn't forget the blood that gushed from the break, or the odd angle Roriger's nose was in. It made her stomach clench, but she ignored that discomfort, knowing she couldn't let it affect her feelings for her prince. So here she was, an hour or so past dawn, making her way through the Red Keep. Determined to see Roriger, to comfort him, to nurse him, whatever she could do to help her prince, she'd do. Her heart fluttered at her willingness, and her imagination, conjuring images of a grateful Roriger showing his appreciation for her. Circe felt the heat creep in her cheeks, her pulse quickening, and her lips parted to let out a pleasurable sigh, but the dream soon ebbed away, from the sound of approaching footfalls and voices. Putting aside distractions and temptations, Circe continued on her way to the royal apartments, where her prince was waiting for her. I can make him better. Circe had looked over herself more than a handful of times before she had set out. Confidence brimming in her heart, knowing he'd finally see her, the woman she could be for him. His friend, his ally, his wife, the last words pulling her lips into a smile. His queen, she continued, his staunchest supporter. All she needed was the courage to seize this moment. A lion didn't hide and wait for its prey to come to them. They hunted, they sought what they wanted, and they took it. I am no different. She felt the tingling of anticipation beneath her skin. The flutter of her heart like a bird in a cage, as she neared with each step. The first lion to subdue a dragon, she thought proudly, and a lioness no less. A little more patience, my love, she prayed for her prince, I will be with you shortly. She was so close, her legs were beginning to tremble in anticipation, her hands fidgeting at her sides. She steadied her steps, and put her hands together. Circe knew her family was counting on her. Thinking of how pleased her father would be within a few hours when she told him that she had snared Roriger with her beauty and her charm. My lady. The voice of the Targaryen guards brought her out of her reverie. She recovered smoothly with a smile she perfected in her years at the Rock on servants and guards alike who asked her too many questions. To her satisfaction, it worked on the two in front of her just as easily. Men, she chided, predictable and pathetic. Oh yes. She blinked at them, fluttering her eyelashes, and pouting her lips. Oh please forgive me, she put a hand to her chest. You startled me, she let out a giggle that made her want to cringe, but the role was needed if she was going to succeed. That wasn't our intention, the guard on the right quickly said. Our apologies, my lady. He bowed his head. The other guard quickly followed and chorused his sentiments. The king has such stalwart men protecting him, she praised, smiling sweetly at them. I have an invitation to give, she added, from my father, knowing the weight those two words carried not just in this city, but throughout the 7 kingdoms. The guards reacted accordingly. Go through, my lady, standing aside to let her pass. Thank you, kind sirs. She walked past them without another look, ignoring their replies as it no longer mattered to her to hear what it was they were saying. He waits for me, She felt as if she was gliding across the floor when the prince's room came into view. A Kingsguard knight was standing outside of it. He blinked owlishly at her. "My lady." It took her a second to put a name to this dark-haired, dark-eyed knight, Sir Alisa Thorne. The newest sworn brother and the one heiress picked, not her father. "Morning, Sir Alisa," she greeted, smiling before slipping into a perfect curtsy. "I have a message for the Crown Prince." Sir Alisa's face was stone as his dark eyes took her in without reaction. His lips finally moved, forming a frown. The prince asked not to be disturbed. Cersei refused to show her anger to this lowly knight who was promoted above his station. "I will not let you stand between me and my destiny." She wanted to roar back at him, but she didn't, knowing her tools were of a different kind than a man's. So instead she smiled back at him, not allowing him to see his words had an effect on her. "Mayhaps, you should tell him about this visitor," she suggested sweetly. She was no servant or lowly member of court, but the daughter of the Hand to the King, a Lannister of Casterly Rock, and the future Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. He looked ready to argue, but sense seemed to finally come to him. He sighed. Very well, sounding annoyed, he showed her his back as his armored knuckles rapped across the wood of the door. He then opened it, and disappeared from view. "Just behind those doors, he waits for me." She was giddy. Self-consciously she ran a hand through her hair to make sure she still looked her very best. She glanced at her dress, noticing no stains or wrinkles, as well checking her neckline where it cut low so that Rhaegar would be able to see her beauty for himself. "One look at me will stir the dragon," she thought confidently. "He will see you." The knight's sharp voice pierced her thoughts. She blinked. "Thank you." She walked past him and into the prince's chambers. "Ones that I'll become quite familiar with," she thought wickedly. Then her eyes found him. He was standing at his table, where numerous tomes and parchments were spread out. Her heart quivered at the tall, silver-haired prince before her. With his indigo eyes, and despite the bandage that was over his nose, this was a face sculpted to display perfect beauty. Lady Cersei Rhaegar's melodic voice was entrancing. "My prince," she replied breathlessly, curtsying after her greeting. "I pray I'm not interrupting something." "You are considerate," he replied. His soothing voice was hypnotic to her ears. "But it can wait." "For me?" She nearly slipped out, but restrained herself. "Is it anything I can help with?" she asked hopefully. A frown settled on his lips, but even it couldn't shadow his handsomeness. "No, you cannot," he said tightly. "Forgive me," she replied hastily, fearing she had let her curiosity ruin her. Before she could further her apology, he held up his hand to silence her. "Sir Alisa said you had a message for me?" he asked. A touch of irritation smattered his tone. "Is it from your father?" "It's now or never," she realized. Plucking up her courage, she went in for the kill. "It's me," she declared. "Pardon?" He blinked. "I'm the message," she explained. I needed a way to speak to you and get past your guards." Her words were fumbling together as she found herself pinned by his gaze. "I came here for you," she revealed. "To help you, to comfort you," she listed, "to do anything I can for you," she offered, finishing her rushed spiel with her best smile while also trying to emphasize herself to get her meaning across. "I see." His voice was chilly. "You're not upset with me, are you?" He ignored her. "Sir Alisa." "My prince." She felt her heart plummet at the stony silence her words fell into. "Yes, my prince." Sir Alisa was inside the room. "Kindly escort Lady Cersei out of my chambers," he instructed, "as well as out of these apartments." He moved to sit back down. "See to it this time I am not interrupted again." "Yes, my prince." Sir Alisa bowed his head to Rhaegar, but the Crown Prince had already dismissed them, his eyes going over one of his tomes. The Kingsguard knight scowled at her before addressing her. "Come with me, my lady." Cersei stood there, mouth agape, blinking, trying to understand what had happened. "Let this be a dream, no a nightmare," she prayed. It wasn't to be like this. She didn't understand. My lady. Alisa's grip on her arm was tight, but it didn't hurt. "My prince." She ignored the knight. My prince," she pleaded, feeling the knight pulling her away from. I'm sorry." She felt tears blur her vision as she waved her arms frantically, trying to stop the knight from removing her from Rhaegar's chambers. Cersei called and she cried, but Rhaegar didn't stir from his seat. "My prince," please. Tears ran down her cheeks, feeling her dreams beginning to crumble all around her. I can help you. He did nothing. Too soon, she was out the door, an annoyed Sir Alisa closing it behind her. Circe's last glimpse of her prince was of his nose in a book. He had never looked up. Go along, girl. Alisa's sharp voice cracked like a whip. She flinched at the harsh sound of it. Snapping out of her daze, she lightly put a finger against her cheek, brushing a tear in the stroke. Looking down at it in dismay, she could hear the angry voice of her father, berating her, for her tears, for her failure, for disappointing him. So she ran. What have I done? Fear and shame seemed to be taking turns at gnawing on her insides, while she wandered cluelessly within the castle. Reflecting on the fool she had made of herself and in front of him, her prince, the man who was to be her husband. I ruined everything. She had failed. She had promised her father that she would see this through, and within a week of her arrival at court, she all but sunk her chances at being Roega's wife. No, no, she pushed it away, not wanting the realization to stick. A setback, the voice assured her. It was the soothing voice of her mother that put aside her doubts and fears. You are my daughter, a lioness of the rock. You will go out with a roar, not a whimper. I need her now, she thought glumly. She'd know what to do. Mother always had a way of making her feel better. Then it came to her, a letter. Circe could write him a letter. Apologizing profusely for my behavior, she perked at the idea. I'll tell him the truth, adding, it was due to being so distraught over his loss, with my inability to sleep over my concern for him. The more she thought about it, the clearer the letter formed in her mind. Knowing this was her chance, she gathered herself, assessed her bearings before she picked the direction she thought would lead her quickly back to the Tower of the Hand. Circe could feel the slow trickle of hope pouring into her broken heart, fixing it as it went. I will show him my strength, rebuilding her confidence as she moved. Prove to him that a lioness will not cower to a dragon. She was determined to see this through. One bad encounter cannot ruin our future, she wouldn't accept that possibility. She caught her prince at a bad time. Her letter would find him in a better mood, and when it did, she knew he'd respond, he'd see her strength, and he'd seek her out. Yes, the last lingering traces of sadness melting away like morning dew beneath the sun. She walked with purpose, with pride. She had run like a wounded animal then, but now she moved like the determined predator that she really was. The sound of footsteps caused her to look up just in time to see King Aeus, and two of his knights trailing behind him. He looked sickly. His silvery hair was stringy and hung limply in dirty knots. His beard was a dirty and disheveled mess. But the worst thing was his nails, they had grown long and yellow. The sight of them made her want to turn away in disgust, but she couldn't. The king carried a pungent scent that didn't help soothe the revulsion she felt bubbling in her stomach. Your Grace, she curtsied. Slipping on a smile, mask in place to look pleased at his sudden appearance. To hide the worry that crept on her, having been warned by her father and brother of the king's impetuous behavior. He blinked at her, his eyes hooded in suspicion, a scowl settled over his face. He looked ready to chide her, but then his expression changed instantly. His lips curved into a smile, eyes glittering in delight as they looked her over. Joanna. His voice was frail and distant. Is that you? No, Your Grace, she answered swiftly, startled at the mistake. The answer wasn't what he wanted to hear. Don't lie to me, he snapped harshly, mouth twisting in rage. I'm not mad. He growled, before his face softened. Forgive me, Joanna, he pleaded, and without warning, he took one of her hands in his, placing a clumsy kiss onto her knuckles. Circe looked towards the guards to help her, but they stood silently. My king, she deftly slipped her hand out of his greedy ones. I must be going, she felt the trickle of panic beginning to seep into her heart. So soon? He sounded disappointed. Please, stay, he begged. Don't go running back to Tywine so quickly. His face hardened at the mention of her father. I must. Circe turned to go, but stopped when she felt his grip on her shoulder. His nails dug into her flesh, causing her to wince in pain. Let go of me, her heart was pounding in her chest. The more she moved, the deeper his nails dug in. Crimson droplets were exposed from the cuts, dribbling down her pale skin. Please, you're hurting me, she felt tears swelling in her eyes. Do something, she half cried, half demanded of the guards. They did nothing, watching her beneath their helms, unmoved by her pleas or their king's madness. "Come back with me," Joanna the king encouraged. "Rollo doesn't control me." He smiled, "I'll be good to you." His voice was beginning to get drowned out by the sound of her heartbeat, which seemed to thunder in her ears. Her vision was blurred from tears. She wanted to crawl deep within herself to hide, to protect herself from whatever it was the king had in mind for her. Then a voice broke through. It pulled her out of her self-induced abyss, snapping her back in the presence. "Father!" Cersei blinked back tears, a rush of relief filled her chest at this unannounced savior. There approaching them was Daeron Targaryen, and behind him was the Kingsguard knight, Sir Oswyl Whent. Aerys turned his attention towards his son. "Go away," he demanded, "we're busy." He put his other hand on Cersei's shoulder, gently as if they were friends. "Father, they're looking for you," Daeron coaxed him. "Your small council members," he added, talking to the king like one would a child to get him to do something. "They need you." "They do." Aerys' eyes grew hazy before he nodded. "Yes, they do." He removed his hands from her shoulders. "These kingdoms would be lost without me," he continued, talking to himself. Come, I have kingdoms to run." He barked at the guards, walking past them without second thought or look. It wasn't until he turned the corridor and was out of sight did Cersei allow herself to breathe once more. She sagged in relief, leaning against the stone corridor, her breaths haggard and greedy as she tried to rein in her frantic heartbeat. Her fingers going to the cuts that were courtesy of the king. She wiped away the blood, leaving red streaks across her skin. "Lady Cersei," Daeron's voice was hesitant. "My apologies," he said. "Did he hurt you?" Anger and fear churned in her stomach to form a volatile mix. "It'll take more than a few scratches to hurt me," she snarled. She wouldn't look weak or scared in front of him. "Of course, my lady." It was the softness of his tone that brought her to look at him. Sympathy lay beneath his pale purple eyes, and when she met his gaze, it was enough to snuff the anger in her gut and for her to feel a bit of shame at how she had unfairly lashed out at him. "I'm sorry," she apologized, her hand going to her head, feeling suddenly dizzy from the entire ordeal. "You have no need to apologize, Lady Cersei," he assured her. "Come, I will escort you back to the tower." She wanted to refuse. After all, this was still the man who had defeated Rhaegar. He had bested her prince. He was the reason why Rhaegar had received her in a poor mood. Had Rhaegar won, he would have been pleased and inviting towards her, but this spare prince took that away from her. However, she knew she could not. Those were not the duties of a lady. Even in anger or discomfort, one must always be gracious and accommodating. They weren't fair expectations, but when was anything fair when it came to the roles women had to play? "I would be grateful, Prince Daeron," she lied, throwing in a thankful smile when she finished, praying for their time together to be brief and quiet. They walked at first in an awkward silence. The prince seemed undecided on whether or not to address his father's behavior. Not that she minded, she preferred the silence, especially if it included not dwelling what happened to her. To stop herself from reflecting on it, she glanced over towards him to see he was dressed for the training yard. To practice with the sword he stole from his brother, she thought sourly. Cersei spotted the sword, sheathed, tied to his belt, the golden hilt, and pommel carved to resemble dragon flame, poking out. "It's a remarkable sword." She looked up to see he had caught her staring. His eyes were beautiful, lilac pools, but she silenced those treasonous thoughts before they could go any further. This was the man who stole his brother's sword. A jealous brute who could only use violence, who possessed none of Rhaegar's finer qualities. "It is," Cersei agreed, "one you're not worthy of," but she hid her true sentiments behind a polite veneer. "If he thinks I'm going to congratulate him on winning, then he is sorely mistaken." He returned her smile, easily duped by it. "The sword of my ancestors," his fingers resting on the hilt. "You can almost feel the power of it, the rich history this blade has seen." His eyes looked lost in thought. "It's a sword, my prince," Sir Oswyl cut in dryly. "You use it to poke the other person full of holes." Daeron laughed. "Hide your awe and envy behind your japes all you wish," he replied, "but you cannot fool me." "My prince," the knight deferred, ducking his head, but his smile could be seen. "Care to hold it, Lady Cersei?" Cersei was stunned by the sudden question. Long had she watched in sullen silence her brother get to fight, get to train with swords while she was given needles and told to be happy. She had never wanted to stitch. She wanted to fight. The control, the power that came with it. To have it in her hands and no one else's. She was denied that and was supposed to be thankful for having such power taken away from her. Prince Daeron, she wondered if he lost his wits when his brother had hit him during their bout. I am a lady. She wanted the sword, she couldn't deny that, but she couldn't look eager. She had to observe decorum. Another dance, she was forced to play. Another farce expected of her. I noticed he grinned, the dress gives it away. She felt her lips twitch at that infectious smile, but she snuffed it out, cursing the man's charm as she did. She found her annoyance for him wane at the temptation he put to her. Refusing to let him see his words have an effect on her, she replied to his jest like she would one of Jaime's, with a glare. However, he did what Jaime never did. He bowed his head. My apologies, if I offended, my lady, he offered, sounding contrite. You did not. She replied quickly. Like he had the power to do such a thing. As if she would care what he said or thought of her. The idea so ludicrous she had to stop herself from laughing. Some of the finest warriors in my family were women, Daeron observed thoughtfully. Seems foolish of us to forget them, or worse ignore them. He pulled the sheathed sword out from his belt. Queen Visenya used this sword herself to help her husband conquer the 7 kingdoms. He looked at the sword with reverence, as did her sister, Rhaenys, and there have been countless others throughout my family. Women who fought and died for our cause. His eyes moved from the sword and onto her. So I ask again, my lady, would you care to hold it? She could have fallen into his eyes in that moment, but she pulled her attention away to avoid temptation. Rhaegar awaits me, she chided herself. I would, she found herself saying, unable to resist the pull she felt at holding a weapon. He smiled, looking pleased at her decision, moving the sword so she could take it from the scabbard. It awaits your touch, he encouraged. Slowly, Cersei moved her hand towards it. When her fingers touched the hilt, she felt what only she could describe as a jolt go through her. Power, she realized, her fingers carefully wrapping around the hilt, wanting to savor the movement, the feel of it within her grip. Ever so slowly, she withdrew it from its leather scabbard, not wanting to appear clumsy or to accidentally damage it. It slid effortless from its cover. It was lighter than she thought. She didn't take her eyes off the blade, studying its fine details. The ruby wrought on the crossguard that felt to be winking at her. It is the very eye of the blade, she thought, as if every wielder of the sword could view her through it in an instant. What do you think? Daeron was still smiling, his eyes going between her and the blade. Magnificent, she breathed, unable to take her eyes off of it. Try it out, he encouraged. A few swings, he added gently at her confused look. She nodded vigorously, unable to contain her excitement, feeling it go from her heart to her fingertips. Cersei took a step back, careful of her surroundings, as she tried to remember how Jaime would use it during one of his lessons. She'd spy on when she'd quit her needlework. Cersei performed it from memory, a cut downwards, but in doing so, her feet nearly tripped over each other in the step. Frantically, in a half-heartbeat, she feared she was going to trip and fall, but Daeron's hand found her shoulder and stopped her. When she regained her balance, his hand dropped. A good first effort, he praised. No, it was not. Her cheeks were hot. She knew she was bad. She didn't need him to lie to her about it, to try to make her feel good that she was terrible. You are too hard on yourself, my lady, he replied quietly. With practice you could be the next Queen Visenya. She snorted at the suggestion, unable to hide her derision at his foolishness. Practice? She scoffed. You think my father would allow that? She sneered. You think my future husband would want a warrior as a wife? He frowned, taken aback by her caustic tone. I pity the man who'd try to deny you, my lady. Here she mumbled, images of the crown prince flickering before her. It belongs to you. She offered him back his sword. He took it with a nod, sheathing it before returning the scabbard back to his belt. She couldn't deny the disappointment that filled her at having the sword out of her grip. The power she felt rushing through her when Dark Sister was in her hand was undeniable. It was addicting. In her mind's eye, she could see herself wielding it, cutting down men who'd oppose her, weaken her, try to stop her. Each of them falling by the wayside to her blade. The thrill was exulting, coursing through her blood, tantalizing her beneath her skin as the triumphs were conjured before her. To know she'd never experienced that sensation again bothered her. Not wanting to dwell on what she was denied, she looked ahead to see they had reached the Tower of the Hand. "Thank you, Prince Daeron, for the escort." Her tone was polite, but dismissive. She ended it with a curtsy. "Lady Circea." He bowed his head. "It was a pleasure." He smiled, gesturing to his knight for them to retreat, but he hadn't taken more than few steps before he stopped and turned back to face her. "You have a fire, my lady. It'd be a shame to see it extinguished." And with those parting words he left. Notes: /n minor Tyrell is an OC in all but name in this story, I suppose. That being said, I still tried my best to write her in a believable way. After all, she is a daughter of the famous Queen of Thorns. A certain brashness and intelligence should be expected. Don't forget to drop a comment. The muse is insatiable, and hearing your feedback keeps it happy and motivated. Thanks again. Spectre for Hire. Chapter 11, Dalliance. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. 278 AC. Jaime. He groaned. Jaime followed that up by silently cursing Robert. It had been him who had insisted they drink, and they did, and then the wine kept flowing, to celebrate Daeron's victory. Robert had said as if it was obvious. "We drank and we celebrated as if it had been us who had bested the Crown Prince and won a famed sword." Another groan followed, as the hazy images of last night assaulted his mind. Damn him, Jaime blinked in the dim light of his chambers. His full bladder and grousing stomach making it impossible for him to try to go back to sleep and to pretend that he was well. His decision made, he pushed away the covers, got up and made his way to the chamber pot. "I could refill a half-dozen bottles," he thought wryly, after relieving himself of what felt like all the wine he had drunk last night. "What a vintage that would be," he smirked. "Lion's shower," he mused. "Lannister gold," he chuckled, finding the levity a nice reprieve to the gnawing headache. More names came to him while he washed his face and hands. They varied in amusement. He inspected his appearance of the looking glass that hung above his table. Pale-faced, disheveled hair, with green eyes blearily looking back at him. "The heir to Casterly Rock," he silently decreed. He could sense his father's glare, hear the disapproval in his tone if he saw Jaime in such a state. Jaime thought himself brave, but he wasn't foolish enough to risk his father's ire by leaving his chambers in such a state. A sudden knock at the door got his attention, and caused a brief, but annoying throb behind his right eye. He groaned, sending a glare in the door's direction. "Jaime." "Ned." Confused at the unexpected arrival of his friend, Jaime made his way to the door to let him in. When he opened it, he put a fake smile in place to try to mask his current misery. Ned wasn't fooled for a second. His grey eyes pierced through the deception. He looked him over, a touch of pity flickered onto his expression. "You're not the first person Robert's talked into drinking, you know." The faint hints of a smile played on his lips. "Why do you think I'm here?" Jaime chuckled. "Never again," he vowed. A moan followed when a fissure of pain racked through his skull. He stepped aside to let his friend in. "Tell me, how does my former friend fare?" "He's awake." Ned ignored Jaime's insincere claim of him ending his friendship with the heir to Storm's End due to last night's drinking. "Robert's out in the training yard." He chuckled when he noticed Jaime's frown. "He's sparring with some of the guards." It was bad enough Robert got Jaime to drink so much that put him in this state, but to know Robert was out there without any ailment while Jaime was suffering. It made him inwardly curse the unfairness of it all. I felt the same way. Ned seemed to sense Jaime's thoughts. "It was back in the Vale, and Robert and I had gotten into Lord Arryn's larder," he admitted sheepishly. "I was in bed all day, suffering while Robert was back out going through his usual routine as if we hadn't drunken." He stopped. "It doesn't matter." Jaime grinned. "Thanks." He meant it. "That helps." Ned returned the smile. I thought it might. I was worried I'd find you in a similar state." He gestured to himself to show that his friend was right in his suspicion. "Will you be joining us in the yard?" Jaime was looking forward to it. "Beating Robert may be the cure I need." He tried his best to sound confident, but his scratchy throat made it difficult. "Is Prince Daeron out there with him?" "No, but I expect he'll join soon." No doubt, he'd like to test his new sword. He isn't the only one. Jaime hoped his friend would lend him the sword so that he could have a chance at wielding the famous Valyrian steel sword. He was sure Daeron wouldn't object. That was how the prince was with his friends, generous and loyal. "I'll let Robert know to expect you." Ned made his way back to the doors to leave. "Thanks, Ned," Jaime called to his friend, "I appreciate it." The northerner nodded and smiled. "Just make sure you beat him." "I will." That would be his tonic vengeance, and one he'd drink gladly. An hour later only found Jaime moderately better. He had washed and dressed, breaking his fast on a bit of bread, jam, and bacon. He didn't dare test his stomach, and found it difficult to eat with the pain residing in both his head and gut. He ate alone. He wasn't surprised not to find his sister, believing she was probably mourning the loss of her beloved prince. "I tried to warn her," he thought, to soften the blow and her expectations. He shook his head. "She's blind when it comes to Rhaegar." After finishing his meal, he returned to his chambers, and finished his letter to Elia. He scribbled a few lines about the duel between Daeron and Rhaegar, promising to send another letter soon with more details if pressed, before he signed it, and sealed it. He hoped it wouldn't take too long to reach Elia in Dawn. Jaime was always anxious after sending them, beginning to quietly count down until the next one from her would arrive for him. He missed her dearly, and longed to see her. They were still not expected to marry for another year or more. A wait that seemed agonizingly long and cruel in Jaime's view. So he hoped to at least have her return to the Rock, or for him to finally visit Dawn at some point in the future to help alleviate the weight of their wedding. Jaime hoped his friends were still out in the training yard, wanting to join them now that he was dressed and able to actually move without the fear of vomiting. He also wanted to thank Robert for his generosity with the wine from last night. His thoughts on his planned revenge on his friend came to a sudden halt at seeing his sister scurrying in front of him, looking frazzled and in a daze. "Cersei." He followed her. He had thought she was in her chambers, expecting her to lock herself in there to mourn and vent her crown prince's defeat for days. She looked up at the sound of his voice. Her green eyes wide, a flicker of something flashed across her face before it slipped away and was replaced with a scowl. She quickly tried to cover herself with a rough spun cloak that clung to her loosely. "What are you doing out?" He halted her before she could escape. His eyes taking in her frizzled hair, and pale face. "What's this?" He saw the red on her dress, looking closely to see it was actually the smear of blood on her shoulders. "Who did this?" he growled. Pain and nausea all but forgotten to the anger he felt stirring within his gut at the thought of someone attacking his sister. Cersei flinched as if struck. "It's nothing," she dismissed, covering the scratches and blood stains with her cloak. "No, it's not." Jaime didn't like this one bit. He put his hand on her shoulder. She recoiled at the touch. "Cersei," his voice, softer and gentler. "It's me," he assured her. "You can tell me." He whispered. His grip on her arm softened, but he kept his hand there to remain reassuring. "No," her voice cracked. "You can't do anything to help me." He frowned. "Of course, I can," he argued. "I'm your brother," he reminded her. "They won't get away with this." He gently moved her away from the corridor they were into an alcove where he hoped they'd avoid attention. "He already did," Cersei whimpered, ducking her head. Jaime felt heat pour into his heart, hot and bubbling. He could never remember seeing his sister looking so dejected. This wasn't his strong, vibrant sister. She seemed a shadow of her former self. Father must be told. "No," Cersei's voice hitched. Jaime frowned, trying to calm the anger that stirred within his chest. He didn't want to sound impatient or unsympathetic to his sister's plight. "Why not?" he asked softly through gritted teeth, biting down on his rising frustration at her unwillingness to have him help her. "Because, you won't be able to do anything." She took a steady breath as if to compose herself before straightening up. Her green eyes determined if not red-rimmed, her face defiant if not slightly pale. "It would be wise if you just pretended this didn't happen, brother." She tightened the cloak around herself. "That you didn't see me." "I can't." He held up his arm to stop her from leaving. "How am I supposed to forget this?" He shook his head in dismay. He gestured to her. "Look at you. What sort of brother would I be if I turned the other way?" "The smart one." Her green eyes were pleading. No, he refused to believe that. Please, Cersei, he encouraged, I can help you. Let me help you. Oh Jaime, a touch of sadness in her voice, her hand went to his face. You can help me by not getting involved. Cersei, Jaime exhaled irritably. Lord Jaime. A messenger had spotted them and made a beeline towards them. It was all Cersei needed to slip out from his grip and leave the corridor, heading in the direction of her chambers. What? Jaime demanded, unbridled annoyance lacing his tone at having him being interrupted, allowing Cersei to escape him before he could figure out what happened to her. My apologies, Lord. The messenger blanched. Your father requests your presence immediately. When Jaime had been told that his father requested an audience with him, he expected it to be in his father's solar. That assumption was proven wrong when it was the stables, not the solar, where he was led to by a pair of servants and a handful of guards. They informed him that Lord Tywine was out in the Kingswood and that was where Jaime was expected to meet him. So off he rode out of the capital with a retinue of guards behind him to find his father's party in the Kingswood. Thankfully, for Jaime, it hadn't taken him too long to see the Lannister banners through the thick foliage of the woods. Slowing his horse to a trot, he followed the path of Lannister Red. Seeing guards greeting him with bowed heads, who were spread throughout a small area of the wood to make sure neither animal nor man bothered the hand of the king. It was then that he spotted his father. He was standing tall and proud, dressed in a crimson doublet with gold trimmings and roaring lions. The golden chain that symbolized his title as Hand of the King hung loosely around his neck. He was walking on the road, a pair of guards behind him. He looked to be deep in thought, but the sound of the approaching horses caught his attention, and Lord Tywine Lannister, Hand of the King, Warden of the West, Lord of Casterly Rock, and Jaime's father turned in their direction. Ah, Jaime, his father greeted him. Even atop a horse while his father was standing, Jaime still felt small in his presence. Father, he returned the greeting. A guard came forward to take the reins of his horse. He nodded his thanks before dismounting. Jaime looked around the surrounding woods. All he could see was Lannister guards fanned out and on patrol. Was there something wrong with your solar, father? Lions attract the attention of the lower beasts, his father observed, and I didn't want our words caught in a spider's web. He then continued on his way down the road that cut through the Kingswood, leaving Jaime to follow him. Has something happened? Jaime chided himself for asking the obvious. Of course something had to have happened. Otherwise his father wouldn't have thought it necessary for them to meet and speak here instead of back at the Red Keep. Yes, his father confirmed, but offered no further explanation or clarification. Jaime bit down the frown he wanted to show, knowing it would earn him a scolding and would hinder his chances of learning more from his father. He wasn't one for silences, but he understood his father well enough to know he seemed to thrive on them. Tywine Lannister had no problem letting silence settle over any conversation or company he was in for as long as it took to give him an advantage. He hated silences and was determined to end this one, but it was his father who uncharacteristically broke it. What do you know of Prince Daeron? He's a great man, Jaime answered quickly, putting aside his confusion at the unexpected question. A true friend, trying to think on what more could be said about the prince who Jaime saw as his closest friend, akin to a brother. The last part Jaime voiced out loud to his father. I once thought the same about Aes, his father noted softly. It was I who knighted him. It was he who asked me to do it, and I did so gladly because he was my friend. Jaime was stunned at seeing this rare slip of reminiscing from his father, who seemed to care little for his past, especially when he was younger, since it usually related to his father, Jaime's grandfather Lord Tytos. That didn't mean Jaime hadn't heard the stories about his father and the king in their youth, but it had never been from him. It had always come from his mother or one of his uncles, or from idle gossip he had picked up, whether it was in Casterly Rock or in King's Landing. His father had always been stern and quiet when the subject was mentioned. I erred in my judgment. He stopped to face Jaime. Do not make that same mistake. Daeron isn't the king, Jaime argued, felt the need to defend his friend's character from that unfair comparison. He remained unflinching under his father's stern gaze. He's a better man than him, the crown prince too. His father regarded him silently for a few heartbeats before turning away and continuing walking. Prince Daeron's shown to be a skilled fighter. His display within the Great Hall will be talked about for some time. As will the sword he earned the right to carry and pass down to his heirs. He pointed out, however, it was only recently that he's proven his character to me. Father. The prince met with me this morning and informed me what his father did. The flecks of gold in Tywin's eyes seemed to burn at his last words. Jaime was about to ask what his father meant when it became suddenly clear. Cersei, realizing now why his sister had begged him not to pursue the topic and wanted it to be forgotten. The thought of the king attacking his sister made his blood boil. He balled his fists at the side. King or not, he couldn't control the lash of anger that stormed in his chest at the image of the king attacking his sister. An injustice has been done to our family. Father's voice was soft, but it still easily punctured through Jaime's thoughts. One I will not forget, nor will I forgive. He took a calming breath, a glint shone in the golden flakes of his green eyes. But it may be something that we can press to our advantage. Reparations could be demanded or threats can be made, he continued. If he thinks he could get away with abusing my daughter, then he's madder than I thought. His jaw clenched. My daughter, he growled, as ferocious as the lion sewn onto his doublets. Jaime had never seen his father so furious. Will you resign? Tywin shook his hand. Aerys won't accept it, even if I threaten to let this slip. He'll struggle and fight to keep us close and this quiet. After all, he is still our king. His lips dipped in distaste at his last words spoken. That still makes him powerful and dangerous. With plenty of sycophants who would pay dearly to see our family tarnished or destroyed. What will we do? Jaime wasn't about to let someone further hurt or threaten their family. He knew his father would have come up with several plans already to appropriately handle this situation and to ensure their family stayed on top. His father's eyes flicked around the empty road save for a few patrolling Lannister guardsmen before moving on to the trees that surrounded them and then to the branches that swayed over them. In each glance he looked to be trying to spot spies and shadows that were listening in on their conversation. In the seconds of silence that followed before his inspection eventually ceased and he seemed satisfied with the privacy they had. There have been whispers from across the narrow sea. It seems Lord Baratheon may have found a match for the Crown Prince. Jaime was caught off guard by the unexpected and what he thought was unrelated news to how his father was going to address the king and what he did to Cersei. From a Volantene noble family with recent connections to lies, his father's tone sharpened at the mention of the Free City. It isn't a coincidence. I have no doubt this betrothal will benefit the Spider. If these whispers turn out to be true and this union goes forward, Aerys will find himself with a potentially powerful Free City alliance. His father's tone made it clear his dislike of it. Whether it was the alliance itself or the fact that it meant Cersei wouldn't marry her prince, Jaime wasn't certain. However, he figured it was probably both. Knowing his father thought little of the Free Cities, and would no doubt see this as an insult that they were selected over their family. This will devastate Cersei, Jaime thought. A twinge of sadness followed knowing how much his sister had yearned for a betrothal between herself and the Crown Prince. If Aerys pursues this folly and ties his heir to the Free Cities, then we must adjust accordingly, Tywin observed. We must focus our efforts on his second son. Prince Daeron. Jaime understood at once what his father was planning. You want a betrothal between him and Cersei. You are the prince's best friend, his father reminded him. You are in the perfect position to help facilitate this match. Jaime's stomach clenched. On the surface nothing was wrong with the suggestion, but that didn't quiet his reservations on the role given to him. He didn't like the idea of it. As much as he loved his sister, he wasn't sure what sort of wife she'd be, with her temperament and pride potentially making her a rather poor spouse. And for the sake of his friendship with Prince Daeron, a part of Jaime pitied him if he was to be matched with Cersei. Do you understand, Jaime? He blinked to see the stern gaze of his father looking down on him. Jaime could feel the heavy expectations from his father settling on his shoulders. Despite his hesitation, he couldn't go against his father. I understand. His father looked down at him with a small but noticeable smile. Jaime hated the swell of satisfaction he felt rise within him at receiving it from him, as it was soon punctured by guilt. You are doing the right thing, he assured him. Family must always come first. His father's hand hovered over Jaime's shoulder before he finally placed it there. Even in regards to our friendships. Daeron. I could get used to this. Jaime gave Dark Sister a few careful flicks. His eyes never leaving the Valyrian blade. Daeron smiled at his friend's enthusiasm. It would be wise if you didn't. Ned chortled from his side while Robert guffawed from where he was standing across from Jaime. There he was dirty and sweating, after having lost in his bout against Jaime, but defeat couldn't puncture his jovial good mood since he blamed his losses on his inability to wield his warhammer for their sparring. The friends had met in the training yard to practice. It was their normal routine, the same one they've gone through ever since Ned and Robert first arrived to the capital. Their friendship between the four of them was quick to form, and the daily continuous of it allowed the friendship to stick. Now sadly, this was their last day in King's Landing. They were leaving in the morning with Lord Arryn. Jaime grinned, looking away from the famous sword and back towards Daeron. "Just a harmless suggestion," he explained, while the sword sliced through air. Aha, Daeron wasn't fooled. "I'll keep that in mind then," he added dryly. "Can you fold me?" he asked. "It's magnificent." "I don't think he's going to return it," Ned observed solemnly, but his grey eyes shone with mirth. Robert laughed, as he dusted himself off. "It's as if you've never seen a sword before." "That would make your defeat from me all the more humbling," Jaime countered. Robert grumbled, but it was clear the jape didn't truly upset him. At watching his friend wield Dark Sister, Daeron's mind drifted back towards earlier in the day when he presented the same opportunity to Jaime's sister, the Lady Cersei. He recalled the warmth in her eyes, the curve of her lips as she was enamored with not just the weapon, but the opportunity itself to wield it. It was the first time that Daeron thought she looked truly stunning. Before, her beauty had always been marred, in his eyes it had been hooded by her petulance and her infatuation with his brother. It was in seeing her wield Dark Sister, in seeing her blissfully happy, was the veil removed, and it gave Daeron a glimpse of the woman beneath. But then it was gone. When his mind reminded him how this woman cared little for him and had wanted his brother to win their duel, those thoughts were enough to cast the shroud back onto her and to leave him disinterested. "She wants my brother and she's welcome to him." Besides, it was another woman who was on his mind, Mynah Tyrell. A woman who chose him, who wanted him, and didn't see him in his brother's shadow. Their time together last night was well spent, and he was eager in seeing her again this evening before supper. Just the thought of her was enough for his pulse to quicken and for a smile to stretch on his lips. "My prince." Daeron blinked into the present to see Jaime was returning Dark Sister, offering it hilt first to him. "Thank you," he cleared his throat, hoping they didn't notice his mental drifting. "Thank you," Jaime insisted, oblivious to Daeron's slip as his friend seemed more distracted by the ancestral Targaryen blade. It was an honor to wield such a weapon. Daeron smiled at his friend. "You are welcome," he patted him on the back. "It will not be the last time either if you'd like." Jaime matched his smile. "I would like that." His green eyes flickering to the Valyrian sword before returning to Daeron's face, where he tried to compose himself, and hide his blatant interest in it, he shrugged. "If you insist." Daeron laughed, shaking his head at his best friend's antics while Ned and Robert were quick to join in. Jaime watched it unfold with his cocky grin. "I'm throwing a feast tonight in the small hall," Jaime announced once the laughter subsided. "To celebrate our new friendships." His eyes turned to Ned and Robert, "and to see you off as you leave the capital in the morning." The reminder that their new friends were leaving brought a sudden pall over the mirthfulness they had just been sharing. "I'd be honored," Ned agreed quickly. Robert added to his friend's sentiments. "An honor to drink you out of your wine," he laughed, infectious and loud, and it was enough to bring smiles and chuckles amidst the friends. "A steep challenge," my friend Jaime warned him through a smile. "I'll have help." Robert slapped Ned on the back, before turning to Daeron. "Isn't that so, my prince?" Of course, Cousin Daeron had no intention of matching his friend in drinks, remembering Jaime's mood and tales of how his morning was spent recovering from the previous night of drinking with him. Robert grinned at his acceptance. "So it's settled." He then turned back to Jaime. "I imagine we can bring guests." "Indeed," Jaime allowed, "despite the name, the small hall is large enough for some extra guests even when it's forced to house your pride, my friend." Robert laughed, uncaring of the jape at his expense. "Careful, Jaime, other men, weaker and less assured, would see that as a slight." He wagged a finger at him. "Thankfully for you, you have me instead." He winked at that, his smiling turned mischievous when he nudged Ned's shoulder. "You heard Jaime, Ned. So make sure you invite your Dornish beauty for the feast." "Thank you, Robert." Ned replied stiffly, but his lips twitched, proving the stoic northerner was no match to his friend's charms. While his friends bickered and bantered about the details of the feast tonight, Daeron's mind went to the beautiful Mina Tyrell, where he couldn't help but wonder about the possibility of bringing her as his guest. This just proves what fools my family are. Mina Tyrell lay tangled amidst the covers, naked and beautiful. Her hair was a mess of curls that fell around her face, but she didn't seem to care. Her blue eyes were bright and inviting, while her lips curved into that smirk of hers which Daeron found quite irresistible. They chase the indifferent dragon while the better one is within reach. Daeron stood at the table, having slipped out of the bed to fetch them drinks. His back was to her, so she couldn't see the smile that touched his lips at her praise. Her words had a way of boosting his pride. With her he never felt like he was in his brother's shadow. How she looked at him, talked to him, touched him, there was never any doubt in his mind or heart that it was he who she wanted and nothing else. My lady is too kind. He poured them their glasses of Arbor Gold. Your lady. The teasing lilt in her tone made his smile widen. 2 dalliances together and you've already claimed me as yours. He chuckled, turning to face her to see the mirthful hue in her eyes as well as her distinctive smirk. I wouldn't be so brave or as foolish to make such a bold claim. He took a seat at the edge of his bed. Such a wise prince. Her arms wrapped themselves around him from behind. If such claims were allowed, then would that mean you're mine? Possibly. He breathed in her floral intoxicating scent, strands of her hair tickling the side of his face. To possess a prince, a seductive whisper to his ears, now that is tempting. A shiver of pleasure strummed through him at her touch and voice. You could do worse. I very much could. She moved to sit beside him and took her glass of Arbor Gold and drank from it. My brother would faint at the chance. She rolled her eyes at her brother's obvious bootlicking ways. That is why this should remain our secret. A gloss of Arbor clung to her lips, only between us, her free hand moving up and down his arm. I don't want my family or the court to infect this. She proved her point by kissing him. He could taste the Arbor Gold. The kiss was a brief press of her lips to his, acting as a delightful promise of what was to come between them. To our secret dalliances. He tapped her glass to his, earning a smile from her before the two drank to their renewed agreement. Here I thought all I'd find in the capital is the smell of shit and bad food. She looked down at her empty glass. I never would have thought to have snared a dragon. An inflection of pride in her voice at the observation. She got to her feet, taking his empty glass as she did before, moving towards the table where the half-empty bottle of Arbor Gold awaited. It was difficult for Daeron to keep his concentration since his eyes followed her graceful steps, the sway of her hips and naked bum as she moved to get them refills. Snared a dragon. He found his voice when she poured them a second glass, or was it third? She looked over her shoulder towards him, smirking, just a saying. Her voice was reassuring. Besides, if any of us was the dragon during this, it was me, she claimed proudly. You. He bit down on the chuckle that wanted to slip past. Absolutely, she said quickly and confidently. It was I who pursued you, she reminded him. In this you were the rose and I the dragon. She sounded amused at the reversal of their sigils. Mayhaps he wouldn't confirm her observation, but it was I who plucked the rose. She giggled. That's what you're calling it? A rueful shake of her head followed, as she turned to him after pouring their glasses. Her eyes shone in amusement, a smile clinging to her lips. It is clear a sword suits you better than a harp. He stood up, noticing the way her eyes darted down before returning to his face, causing him to smile. You have very much enjoyed my sword. His smile only grew when she rolled her eyes at his choice of words. If only your wit was as sharp at that new sword of yours, she said unimpressed, but her eyes betrayed her, twinkling in the candlelight. Daeron took the glass from her before pressing a quick kiss to her cheek. It would seem my sword is never far from your mind. He winked down at her before taking a sip. No, it is not, she admitted wickedly. That's why I told my family I was at the September. I'm lighting a candle to the maiden. Thanking her for protecting my chastity and virtue or something, she trailed off, waving her hand, the amused glint in her eyes a clear indication of what she thought of it all. Daeron couldn't help but chuckle at her excuse. The September. That's where they think you are now. Her impish smirk was perfection in his eyes when he found himself the center of it. They do indeed, my prince, her voice a seductive purr. That's why I must stay a little longer. She pressed her lips to his. I have a devout reputation to maintain. Prince Daeron. He looked up to see Jaime approaching him. He smiled in greeting towards his friend, Jaime, are you welcoming all your guests in such a manner? He hadn't even reached the small hall yet. He and Segwayne were still climbing the steps when Jaime spotted them, descending the steps to intercept them. Jaime returned the smile. No, I am not, he joked, so do not let the others know. His expression turned somber and his voice dropped when he continued, I was wondering if we could speak privately for a few minutes. Of course Daeron was surprised by the shift in his friend's tone. Segwayne, he turned to his sworn shield, will you allow Jaime and I a few moments? Segwayne nodded, yes, my prince. Satisfied, Jaime urged Daeron to follow him into a corridor with Segwayne walking a respectful distance, far enough not to overhear, but still able to watch and intervene if the occasion called for it. Daeron looked back at his sworn shield and then back at Jaime. What's troubling you, friend? Jaime frowned as if confused at Daeron's apprehension. Nothing, he waved that suggestion off. I wanted to thank you actually. It was Daeron's turn to frown. Thank me? Yes, about my sister. Jaime's voice dropped, and what you did to protect her. Shame filled Daeron's gut. He ducked his head as he recalled his father's beastly behavior while trying to push away his thoughts on what he would have done had he not arrived when he did. Think nothing of it, he said tightly. If anything, I should be apologizing for my... Don't, Jaime cut him off, he's the king. There was a finality in his friend's tone, and his green eyes hardened. Let us speak no more of it. Very well, he too had no desire to think or discuss the matter anymore. He had meant to say something about it to Jaime after he had spoken to Lord Tywine, but the day slipped away from him. And when he did find himself in his friend's presence, he allowed his selfishness to overrule his senses because he didn't want the topic to drudge up the fun they were having. My family is grateful. Jaime told him. I am grateful. His smile thawed the stoicism that had covered his expression. He patted Daeron on the shoulder. You're a good friend, my prince. You as well, Jaime. Daeron returned it, and my father should be grateful for your family. You have served us well and faithfully. He added, Westeros has prospered due to the friendships between House Targaryen and Lannister. They have, Jaime agreed, so come let's celebrate that friendship. Jaime's hand remained on Daeron's shoulder, steering him to where Segwayne was waiting, and to the new ones we've made. You will visit me in Storm's End. Robert was adamant in his invitation. You cannot leave me with only my parents and brothers. He shuddered at the thought of it before dousing his dislike of the notion with more ale. Daeron and his friends were seated together in the small hall. Despite their small group, they were as raucous and as messy as a group with twice their numbers. They had spent the night eating, and drinking, and joking as the friends relished their time together, knowing it would be a while before they were all together again. Dirty plates and goblets that went from empty to half-filled were the lone remnants of the feast the friends had shared, which were starting to be taken away by Lannister servants who moved quietly and quickly as they went without disturbing them. You speak as if your brothers are others, Robert. Ned shook his head, looking across the table at his friend with an expression torn between amusement and bewilderment at how his friend viewed his family. Stannis is as cold as them, I'll wager, Robert replied, gruff and stern. You'd think he'd seen 50 years instead of 10 and 4. Of course, I'll visit, cousin. Daeron had never seen the famous ancestral seat of House Baratheon. The seat they took from House Durrandon after Oris Baratheon helped Aegon conquer 6 of the 7 kingdoms. It hadn't just been the seat of Storm's End, Oris claimed for House Baratheon, but their sigil and words too. As well as taking King Argilac's daughter as his bride. Robert grinned, clearly relieved that he wouldn't be forgotten in the Stormlands. You're a good man, Daeron. He raised his tankard in salute before drinking. Storm's End does sound like quite the castle, Jaime observed, from his seat at Daeron's right. Be a shame not to see it. A tour and stay of Storm's End for a tour and stay of Casterly Rock. Robert offered. Agreed, though you're getting the better end of this deal. None better than Casterly Rock, Jaime boasted. You're invited too. He looked over to Ned, adding the invitation not as an afterthought but as a sincere assurance that his friend didn't feel forgotten or ignored. And you as well, Lady Ashura. The Dornish beauty who was sitting beside Ned smiled at Jaime's invitation. I would be honored. She ducked her head in thanks, though I am sure I'll be seeing it soon since you will be marrying my dear friend. A slight, but brief glaze could be seen in Jaime's eyes at the mention of his pending marriage with the Dornish princess, Elia Martell. Robert guffawed, Ned and Daron traded smiles while Lady Ashura's purple eyes held a mischievous sheen to them at her teasing. "I will indeed," Jaime confirmed, taking it in stride. Looking and sounding pleased at his future with Princess Elia. That earned an additional smile out of Ashura, who looked on approvingly. Here Daron tapped his empty tankard against the table. He looked around at his friends who were gathered around him. To one side sat Jaime and Robert, and the other Ned and Ashura. She had come at Ned's invitation. Lady Cersei had been with them for part of the night, but she had excused herself as soon as etiquette allowed her to leave. Her presence hadn't been missed, and despite a weak protest from Jaime for her to stay longer, her departure left the others with no real reaction of regret or disappointment. She hadn't proven to be in the same good mood as her brother or had taken up the responsibilities of hosting this feast as he had. She was morose and quiet, and though she sat next to Daron on Jaime's suggestion, the seat he now filled, Daron spoke few words to her. Finding himself with a difficult challenge of what to do or say, since it had only been this morning that his father had touched and terrified her. An act that brought shame and guilt to Daron, but he wasn't sure that was what the Lady Cersei wanted to hear, nor have the incident being brought up at all, especially when they were in the company of others. So he kept quiet as well in his dealings with her. He was ashamed to admit it, but he was a bit relieved when she chose to leave, as it gave him the selfish reasons of not having his mind being distracted or dwelling on what had occurred between her and his father. Feelings that he tried to push away, as the sliver of guilt wormed its way into his heart at such self-centeredness. "I am not that man," he told himself, "I will never be." A booming laugh from Robert pulled Daron out of his thoughts about Lady Cersei to see Jaime was grinning. A certain glimmer in his eyes which made Daron realize he had just said some clever jape. Ned's chuckling and Ashura's laughter only confirming his suspicion. He allowed himself to smile so as to not disappoint his friend in thinking he hadn't heard. The smile didn't feel forced or deceitful to him, since it came quickly and naturally to Daron when he was in the company of his friends. It may not have been Jaime's jape that was the cause of it. However, it didn't mean it wasn't any less sincere, since it still came from seeing his friends together and happy. "I'd like to say a few words." Daron cleared his throat to get his friend's attention, finding himself suddenly promoted to speak and to put together a toast for the evening. "You came to this city as strangers and you leave as my dearest friends. I thank the old and the new gods for putting you upon my path. I consider myself fortunate for the friendships we've forged these last few weeks. May they endure the test of time and distance." He raised his glass. "I drink to you, Robert Baratheon, and you, Eddard Stark, my newest friends." Notes. We'll get Rulla's reaction and thoughts on the duel between her sons in the next chapter. Sorry if there was any doubt about that. It wouldn't be Asoyaf in my opinion without a little bit of cringy pillow talk between our characters. I really enjoy writing and showing the camaraderie and exploring the friendships between these young men and what might have been in a believable manner. Hopefully, you like their portrayal as well. I am aware that Robert comes across as too much of a joker who loves to drink. I'm not trying to make him one-dimensional, but trying to stick to what we know about him. Even when he was young he was amiable, charming, and liked his ale. However, that doesn't mean he'll evolve into that man. He'll experience some growth and also be given chances to shine and show maturity and wisdom that we just haven't reached yet for this story. So I just wanted to add that in case there were any concerns about his character and his arc in this story. Don't forget to drop a review to let me know what you think. It means a lot to get your feedback and to see the audience's thoughts and reactions. The feedback in general for this story has been tremendous, so my one request is let's keep it that way, but we can always increase it. Happy Smiley. Thanks for the awesome support you give this story. Spectre for Hire. Chapter 12, 279 AC, Dawn. Notes. Thanks to everyone who was kind enough to leave behind a comment for the last chapter. Your support means so much to me. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. 279 AC. Joanna. You summoned us, cousin. I did, Jerry, and she wasn't bothered by the informal greeting. She came to expect such charm from him. She held her hand up to stop Kevan from correcting his youngest brother while Tijet did nothing in the matter, taking his seat, looking sour and uninterested. She had called them to the solar, watching them take seats around her. The latest letter from Jaime was folded closed and at her elbow. Yes, Kevan, no need to waste your breath blustering. Gerion's green eyes gleamed in amusement. You're giving me a headache. Tijet poured himself some ale that had been brought to them by one of the castle's servants while Joanna had wine. To be fair, brother, you would be drinking regardless of any such pain I inflicted on you. Gerion took the seat furthest away. Tijet only grunted, deciding it was better to nurse his ale than continue bickering with his brother. Joanna had gathered them all here because an opportunity had presented itself, and she could not ignore it. She would move forward with her plan first and then bring it to her husband's attention. She wasn't concerned of Tywin's reaction, knowing she had his trust in ruling the Rock while he was away as well as deferring to her when it came to their children. So in her husband's absence she would rely on his brothers, who had served Tywin as advisors and counselors to help ensure the continued prosperity of House Lannister. She would have included Jenna as well, whose wit and cunning she relied on, but sadly, she had been instructed to stay in bed for the remainder of her pregnancy. Is that from Jaime? It is. Her fingers resting on the letter. It had been a welcomed arrival as it gave her first glimpse of Tyrion outside of the Rock. He had been invited to the Water Gardens of Dorne by Princess Elia after Jaime had been invited to Dorne by Prince Doran. Tywin was reluctant despite Jaime's insistence his brother come with him. Tyrion hadn't left the safety of the Rock or Lannisport, but in the end, Joanna had convinced him. A decision that looked to have been the right one as Jaime's letter brought with it great tidings. His words about his brother's time in Dorne caused her heart to swell with happiness. He's happy, he enjoys himself, and has made friends. The rest of which brought a few teardrops to fall on the letter, staining the paper and blotting bits of her son's messy scrawl. They were tears of relief and joy overcame her at the thought of her son being well treated amongst strangers and making friends. Despite convincing Tywin to let him go, she could not deny her own fears that gnawed at her, having never left young Tyrion's side since he was born, and to let him not only out of her sight but so far away had left her stomach in knots, worried and fearful of what arrival awaited her son in Dorne. She had not been the only one. Cersei too had misgivings, but never showed them in front of Tyrion, who had been so happy and excited about the trip he would be taking with Jaime. Putting aside her relief and happiness at Tyrion's warm welcome in Dorne, it was within this letter that Jaime had sparked the idea that she was determined to carry out. How are they? Gerion always had a fondness for Joanna's children, doting on all three of them in equal measures. Regaling them with jokes and stories that easily catapulted him into the position as the children's favorite uncle. He is well, Joanna told them. Tyrion is enjoying himself. A relieved smile passed over the features of Gerion before he shifted his expression into a more relaxed look. It was brief, but telling, only further showing his affection for his nephews. Jaime has also informed me that Prince Daeron is expected to travel to Dorne after his visit in the Stormlands. She suspected the prince had traveled to Storm's End, consoling his friend and new lord, Robert, who had lost his parents in a storm on their way back to Westeros after securing a bride for Prince Rhaegar. It had been a tragedy to lose Lord Steffon Baratheon and his wife, Lady Cassina. She respected them both, and considered them friends. Joanna wasn't alone in that sentiment, recalling the close friendship that Tywin had had with Aerys and Steffon when they were younger. A friendship that looked to have carried over to their sons as Daeron, Jaime, and Robert had become close friends too, as well as Eddard Stark, Lord Rickard's second son. She only hoped their friendships didn't sour like their parents had. I expect Prince Daeron to have already arrived to Dorne, but he will stay for a time, as he counts both Princess Elia and Prince Oberyn among his friends. Joanna continued. That is why we will be sending Cersei to Dorne under the pretext of collecting Tyrion and bringing him back to the Rock. With Crown Prince Rhaegar wedded to his Free City's bride, that meant Prince Daeron was the only noble Targaryen prince that would be suited for their daughter, Cersei. It was important to move forward with Prince Daeron, as other lords would begin vying for the potential of marrying one of their sisters or daughters to Aerys' second son. What better way for them to start than under an inconspicuous guise as a visit to Dorne, away from the prying eyes and shadows that are concealed in the capital and in the king's court. Another prince for Cersei, Gerion surmised. Despite his efforts, he couldn't conceal his cleverness, even when he pretended not to possess it, settling for japes and bawdy stories. It is because he fears that his wits could not match that of Tywin's, Joanna suspected, so he doesn't bother to try. Which number is this? Gerion scratched his chin, feigning to be in deep thought. 3. 4. It is the second, Kevan chided him, sending his brother a look of disapproval. Tijet, I'm putting you in charge of the company of guards that will be escorting Circea to Dawn. She turned to the only one who had yet to speak. You will be leaving the day after next. Very well. He wasn't able to hide his dislike at the idea of having to travel to Dawn. Does my brother know of this venture? He will. Tijet understood, and nodded. He finished his tankard of ale before standing up. If you excuse me, I'll begin the preparations. Thank you, Tijet. She allowed him his leave, knowing that he probably chastened at being given instructions from her. He was a proud soldier, who prickled under Tywin's shadow, but he was loyal to the bone to their house, so she allowed him his surly brooding. What of Circea? Kevan didn't make his opinion known of the plan or that it hadn't met with his brother's approval yet. He looked to be struggling with the proper description. She has been unwell for some time. That's a gentle way of putting it, Geryon snickered. Our little niece is sulking. Their observations rung true. Circea had been inconsolable when it had been announced that a bride had been found for the crown prince. She had unwisely allowed delusions to settle in her head that Roriger was already hers, and had dreamed of the golden-haired dragons she'd give him. With shattered dreams, she was sent back to the rock by Tywin, where she sobbed and raged upon losing her beloved Roriger. She had refused to go to the wedding, lingering at the rock where she brooded and cursed her misfortune and the royal life that had been denied her. The only light for her had been Tyrion, but he was now in Dawn with Jaime. His absence had only let Circea sink deeper into despair. I will handle Circea, Joanna assured them. I will remind her of her duties to our family. And what is expected of her? What of the king? Kevan asked. He's denied us once already. He frowned. What's to stop him from denying us again? It isn't in Aerys' nature to make the right decision when our beloved brother is involved, Geryon quipped. Summerhall. A quiet hush had fallen over the Solar at the mention of the ruined castle that once used by the Targaryen family. It had been destroyed by a disastrous fire that had killed King Aegon the Unlikely, and his son and heir, Prince Duncan, and countless others of importance. Aegon's doom, Kevan muttered softly. Can be rebuilt and restored. Our family can finance it as part of a betrothal agreement between our house and the crown. Joanna wanted to pull them out of their reflective haze, and it can be made Prince Daeron's seat. She had once thought Castellaria could serve as a suitable seat, but she came across problems at the idea, so her interest shifted to the former Targaryen seat in the Stormlands. She knew restoring it would delight Aerys. Remembering when they were younger how he used to enjoy Summerhall, and the feasts he'd host there as a prince when he felt King's Landing was too stifling and Dragonstone too grim. It was a bleak ruin now. A smouldering graveyard that signaled the near annihilation of the Targaryen dynasty. It could be remade to its former glory, where revels and feasts and tourneys could be had there once more and not a place solely for mourning and reflection. That would be quite the financial undertaking, Kevan said cautiously. Geryon chuckled. To most families, mayhaps, he shrugged, but last I checked we're sitting on a gold mine, brother. That is to be discussed with Tywin for another time. Joanna wasn't as concerned as Kevan, but neither was she as dismissive as Geryon. Saying her husband's name had the desired effect as it brought the two brothers to heel. I'll write the letter to Tywin to inform him of what we're planning. An hour later, Joanna found herself in the company of her daughter within the Solar. Kevan and Geryon had departed with their appointed tasks, and Joanna was left to handle hers. Dawn. That's right. She looked to see Circea had been prepared for their meeting by the servants. Her face was freshly scrubbed, her hair washed, and her gown was clean and presentable save for a fresh rip among one of the sleeves. In the aftermath of Roriger's wedding, Joanna had allowed Circea her time and space to mourn and rage at the missed opportunity of being Roriger's wife and Westeros queen. She had hoped those feelings would stir Circea's ambition and her pride at not allowing one rejected betrothal shape her life. She believed that Circea would come to her not accepting such defeat and ready to move forward to get her revenge, but Joanna realized she was wrong. I've failed her, she thought sadly, seeing her bereft daughter in such a state. I chose solitary instead of comfort when handling her distress. This only strengthened her resolve in making sure this betrothal went seamlessly. She would not have her daughter lose a second Targaryen prince. Prince Daeron will be Circea's husband, she vowed silently, no matter the cost. The time for reflections is over, darling. She squeezed her daughter's hand. Westeros has lost an opportunity for a great queen, and Roriger a lovely wife. Circea's fingers squeezed tightly. you will show the king and the court his folly and remind them that a lioness cannot be so easily spurned. Circea's reaction was a sniffle. Her lip trembled, while fresh tears threatened to fall. I thought I raised a lioness, not a weepy house cat, Joanna chided her. She wanted to fan the fire that she knew her daughter possessed, which had been extinguished for too long. A great beauty that was beyond compare to the maidens of this realm who would ensnare the proudest of dragons. Her daughter wiped at her eyes, but no tears had been shed. I am a lioness of the rock, she hiccuped. Her lip was no longer shaking, and the pools that were in her eyes were gone, instead a simmering fire could be seen lurking beneath. I know you're upset, child, but you will use it, she confided in her. It will motivate you and it will ensure that you will not taste such bitterness again. She smiled at her daughter, thankful that she was slipping out of her brooding shell. It was supposed to be Roriger, she said petulantly. No, Joanna was quick in her reprimand, not allowing such a reaction. She hoped that was the dying outburst of her tantrum and not its beginning. Roriger is lost to you. You will accept it and you will be glad of it. Glad. Her tone threatened on disrespectful. I would have been a queen. So? Joanna wasn't impressed. Circea was caught off guard by her glib response. "IIDBQ queen," she sputtered. "IID have power." Her eyes gleamed at the conjured future she let play out in her mind. Joanna scoffed. "I didn't raise a fool." She shook her head. "You were at the capital." Circea frowned. "I was." "And what of Queen Rolla? Did she have power?" She challenged. "Did she look happy?" It hurt her to voice the questions out loud, as it forced her to confront the grim reality that plagued the woman she had considered a dear friend for so many years. She didn't want to be queen, Joanna remembered. That crown had only given her grief and misery. "No," she answered slowly, aware of the confirmation it brought, but she refused to let it dampen her for long. "Roriger would be different." "You do not know that." Joanna noticed there was no conviction in her daughter's voice in her refusal. "I do." She bowed her head. He rejected me." Her admission was a mere whisper. I came to him, wanting to help, but he sent me away." Joanna moved to stand behind her daughter, hugging her from behind. Her head resting on her daughter's, trying to soothe the raw emotions that she was experiencing. "Then he is a fool, darling," she assured her, "and you are better off not being his wife." She kissed Circea's head. Distance can be its own cruelty. Circea didn't speak up right away, letting the heartbeats of silence stretch on between mother and daughter, as she composed herself. "I was stupid." She looked over her shoulder at her. "I won't be stupid again." Joanna smiled down at her. "You will consider yourself fortunate, Circea. Prince Daeron is handsome." Her smile turning impish as she nudged her daughter's shoulder. "Do not try to deny it." "You cannot fool me." Her gentle ribbing brought a giggle out of her, and it was a peal of delight that filled her with happiness. "Mother," she said when the giggling subsided, sounding flustered at the sensitive nature of the talk before them. "Oh, Circea, I was young once." Joanna dismissed her daughter's half-hearted protests. "But I will not press the matter," winking down at her. "He is kind and charming, and a skilled fighter." "He is." Circea's tone had an odd touch to it that Joanna couldn't quite place. She put that aside and continued, "The gods have put you on a different path to walk. Perhaps, it is with Prince Daeron that you will find contentment, that you will find respect." Circea responded with silence. Whether she was mulling over her words or sulking at the glories lost to her, Joanna wasn't sure. However, she knew she needed to stamp out the latter, or any hope of a blossoming betrothal between her daughter and Prince Daeron will surely die in its infancy. "Circea," she coaxed her daughter, "you must let Roriger go." She spotted the hesitance that lingered in her daughter's gaze, stubbornly clinging to a hope that wasn't there. "Please, child, for your sake." "I will, Mother," Circea said quietly. "Jaime. Circea is traveling to Dawn." The letter had come from his mother and had been delivered to him at his chambers within the Water Gardens. It now remained crumpled in his hand as he mulled over its contents. It was brief and vague in case it was intercepted or read by unwanted eyes, but it was loud and clear to him what he must do. Ingratiate his sister with Prince Daeron to ensure a relationship can take root. He put the letter to the nearby candle that rested on his table. He watched it burn while his father's voice echoed in his head. "Family must always come first." He sighed, understanding what was to come and the role he needed to play, but it didn't make it any less difficult. The prince may not have been family, but Jaime considered him a brother. Jaime. He looked over his shoulder to see the welcomed sight of Elia walking towards him. His family and schemes were fleeting in the face of the enchanting princess. He got to his feet to greet her. "Hiding in your room?" she teased. "Are you afraid of the sun?" "Not afraid," he grinned, "I'm in awe of it." He kissed her. His desire for her only growing at her contenting sighs and teasing touches. "Jaime," she whimpered in between their kisses. Her hands sliding beneath his tunic, her fingers skimming across his skin, a searing touch that left him wanting more. "My princess spoils me," he said breathlessly when he pulled away from their heated embrace. A reluctant action but a necessary one, as he was expecting his brother shortly. Her dark eyes shimmering amorously. "My lion is good to me." She kissed his cheek. He breathed in her intoxicating scent. She smelled of lemons and desire. The impulse to continue their kiss grew and burned within despite his efforts to stem them. He took her hand and led her to the table where Dornish wine awaited them. "Have you heard from Ashura?" "I haven't." Elia frowned in her answer. They should have reached Starfall by now. That they were Jaime's friends, Robert and Eddard. The two had accompanied Prince Daeron from Storm's End and had feasted a night at Sunspear with Prince Doran before continuing their voyage to Starfall. It was there where Ned was going to ask Lord Dane for Ashura's hand in marriage. Jaime poured them each a glass of the wine. This was a strong wine vintage and one of the few Dornish wines that he liked. He handed her a glass. "I'm certain they've been too busy feasting and celebrating the betrothal and have forgotten to write." The excuse felt hollow even to his ears. Elia sent him a skeptical look that revealed she too felt his words sounded weak. "I'm sure we'll hear from them soon." Jaime tried a different approach, taking the seat beside his own betrothed. Lord Dane would be a fool to deny Ned. She took his words in silence as she sipped her wine. "Let us pray you are right." "When am I wrong, princess?" Too often, her smile dampening her rebuke. He laughed. "Your wit is as sharp as your brother's spear, my lady." "Sharper," she corrected. Jaime looked down at his untouched glass of strong wine, taking a small sip and savoring the sweet taste that came with it. "How is Oberyn liking his potential bride?" A party from the Reach had arrived a few days ago. It had been Oberyn's ideas and not of his older brother and ruling prince, Doran. So it came as a surprise to all when he announced that he invited Mace Tyrell's sister to the Water Gardens with the intentions of considering a possible betrothal between himself and the Lady Tyrell. As an outsider to Dornish politics, even Jaime saw it as a smart match. A betrothal between a Lady of Highgarden and a Dornish prince could help to soothe past bitter rivalries between the Reach and Dorne. "You don't know?" Elia frowned. "He never told you?" "Who?" Jaime felt the frustration bubbling up. "Never told me what?" "Lady Minor. She isn't for my brother." Elia answered simply. "She's Prince Daeron's paramour." "Wait, what?" Jaime didn't understand. "She is his secret paramour," Elia said sympathetically, sensing his hurt and confusion upon not knowing earlier. "How did you know?" "Oberyn cannot keep secrets from me," she shrugged. "Besides Oberyn getting married." She sounded amused. "He has no intention of committing such folly." "I didn't know," he mumbled, unable to deny the hurt that came with it. He thought Daeron a brother, and yet when he needed to confide a secret, it was Oberyn not Jaime he turned to. Is he wrong? The thought came to him, as soft as a whisper. "Your family wants him with your sister. Who would you choose? His happiness or your family's?" Jaime frowned at being confronted with that truth. It was a touch that broke from his musings, looking down to see the soft, tanned hands of his betrothed atop his. His eyes found her face, where she sent him a look of understanding. In seeing her, he didn't have the energy to care about his family's plotting and his father's schemes. That didn't matter to Jaime, which prompted him to ask. "Does she make Prince Daeron happy?" "Yes." "Good." She smiled towards him. "You're a good friend, Jaime." She squeezed his hands. "Prince Daeron loves you as a brother. Please don't see this as a slight of his trust towards you." He returned her smile. His spirit was buoyed by her words, finding himself so grateful at having a betrothed who cared so much. Despite her supposed fragility, that never stopped her from being his rock. Her compassion made her stronger than Jaime thought he'd ever be. "Auntie Elia." A delighted squeal broke the comfortable silence that had fallen on the betrothed couple. The two turned to see Tyrion waddling into the room. His mismatched eyes were solely set on the Princess of Dawn. He had a bright smile as he approached her. "Auntie Elia, are you coming with us to the fountains?" Auntie Elia, Jaime couldn't help but grin at the name. His younger brother spent much of his time here with Doran's daughter, Princess Arianne, and Oberyn's bastard daughter, Obera, both of whom called Elia their aunt. Not wanting to be let out, Tyrion started to call her that too. Elia took to the name with delight. "Tyrion," she stood up to greet him. His younger brother, usually so shy and reserved in the presences of strangers. That quickly changed during his brief time at the Water Gardens and being around Princess Elia. Like the sigil of her house, her warmth melted away his shyness, showing him nothing but smiles and kindness, and in doing so earned the affection of a timid boy and securing her place in Jaime's own heart. She scooped him up and kissed his cheek, much to his joy. "How is my favorite Lannister?" "We're gonna play in the fountains," he answered, savoring the fondness she showed him. "Who's we?" Jaime took his brother from Elia's arms, knowing that the wait could be troublesome for her if she held him too long. Jaime got his answer not from his brother but by the loud intruders who allowed themselves into his room. Tyrion squirmed in Jaime's grip at their arrival, clearly favoring being with them. He put his fidgeting brother down just as Princess Arianne and Obera began circling Jaime's legs. The girls were 3, younger than Tyrion, but that never stopped them from acting as if they were his older sisters instead, something that his brother didn't seem to mind. Auntie Elia, Obera greeted her. "Are you coming with us?" "Yes, Auntie." Arianne turned to her as well. "Please. Am I invisible?" Jaime was dramatically looking around the room to see if he could be seen. His performance garnered laughs from the children. "No, Uncle Jaime," Arianne answered quickly. Despite them only being betrothed and not married, that didn't stop the children from calling him uncle. It was something that Oberyn actively encouraged. Jaime didn't mind it, he liked it as it served as a reminder of his pending union with Elia. "Then why aren't you asking me?" "Because," Obera said as if it was obvious, "we know you're coming." Jaime laughed, admiring their confidence, and realized they had a point. He always folded to their requests and it seemed it hadn't gone unnoticed. Elia was giggling from where she stood, holding Tyrion's hand while her nieces were tugging at the skirts of her dress. "Well, of course, I couldn't leave my lions in the company of such dangerous beauties." Obera and Arianne cheered. They exchanged grins before racing each other towards the fountains. The servants that were tasked with watching them were forced to follow them, hopelessly calling back to them to slow down. "We shan't let them beat us." Jaime picked up Tyrion, who encouraged it with a laugh. "What do you say, brother?" He carefully placed him atop his shoulders. "Shall we try to catch them?" "Yes," Tyrion exclaimed, his stubby hands clinging tightly to Jaime. "We shall need a princess blessing." "Is that right?" Elia asked with a knowing grin. "Of course," Jaime insisted, "it's only proper." "Proper?" Tyrion echoed happily. Elia shook her head, but her smile never left her face as she approached the Lannister brothers. "Well, only because it's proper." He bent down so she could reach Tyrion, who was thrilled when she kissed both his cheeks for his blessing. Jaime cleared his throat, grinning as he did. Elia rolled her eyes. "Jaime," she murmured softly, "you will always have my blessing," she promised him, before kissing his lips. It was a brief but intoxicating touch, that ended far too abruptly when Tyrion yanked at his hair. "Come on, Jaime," Tyrion reminded him, "before it's too late." Very well. The touch of her lips remained a distraction on his mind, as did the playful smirk she gave him when it was over. He stymied the groan, knowing there would be time for future pleasure with his betrothed. But right now he had a race to win. Prince Doran's table that night was loud and crowded, but Jaime had gotten used to it during his stay at the Water Gardens. He enjoyed the intimate setting where the prince and his wife hosted their meals, allowing the children to sit with them, both noble and bastard. That night they supped on lamb that had been seasoned with honey, lemon, and fiery peppers. It was served with grape leaves stuffed with raisins, onions, mushrooms, and fiery dragon peppers. To wash it down was an array of Dornish wines, red and strong wine. The sweet and spicy foods of Dorne was something Jaime was still trying to get his stomach to accommodate to. The richness of the food and the variety of flavors ranging from sweet to bittersweet, and spicy to sweat-inducing levels of hot and zesty. This meal was no different. He was never quick with his food, sampling and measured bites to get himself adjusted to the diverse palates that Dawn offered. He was also quicker with his wine, depending on it to help swallow some of the more difficult tastes that he had trouble finishing. All around him conversations were happening, laughing and talking, as the guests talked among themselves, sharing and joining others in mid-discussion. It was loud, but Jamie found a comfort in the noise. The closeness of the Martell family was warm and he had to admit he enjoyed the atmosphere it created. It was a stark contrast to his family meals at the Rock which he enjoyed, but the intimacy wasn't the same to this. Discipline and etiquette was still expected even if it was just the meeting in the hall. Even as he nibbled at the lamb, he overheard a particular bawdy story Oberyn was telling to the Lady Minor, his brother, and Prince Daeron. Its ending made Jamie nearly cough up his food while silently praying his brother hadn't heard the story or worse.